Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto goes to Durmstrang Harry Potter. Before I start, please support for more amazing content, and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by AizenTheGoat and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. The energy at the 422nd Quidditch World Cup Finals was palpable. Die-hard Quidditch fans from all over the world were in attendance to see the final match between Ireland and Bulgaria. The roaring of the fans was deafening, and the game hadn't even begun. The stadium was packed to the brim with green and red jerseys, each already cheering for their respective team. When the fans get into it, they really get into it, don't they? A young man said from within the locker room. The man in question wore black pants and shoes along with a thick black jacket to keep him cold from the cold. The World Cup was held in England this year, and the temperature tonight just so happened to be on the chilly side. Over the jacket, he wore a red Bulgaria jersey with the number 7 along the sleeves. He stood at 59 and had short blonde hair and blue eyes. He had slight Asian features, though they weren't as dominant as his English ones. His name was Naruto McGonagall, the 17-year-old great-grandson of the Transfiguration professor at Hogwarts. Many people often commented how it was strange to have an English last name with an Asian first name, but that had since stopped bothering him. Having to explain his mother's circumstances that led her to be raised by her grandmother wasn't something he liked to reiterate. Of course, a gruff voice replied. It was male with a very heavy accent on his reply, indicating he was not a native English speaker. Quidditch is the most popular sport among the magical community, you get used to it. The man was only an inch taller than Naruto at 510. His hair was buzzed down short, and had a mustache and goatee on his face. Like Naruto, he also wore a red Bulgaria jersey with the same number, only his was being worn for the game, and not to cheer the team on. The man was Viktor Krum, seeker of the Bulgarian national team, and renowned as the best seeker in the world. He was also Naruto's best friend. The two were standing in front of his locker, with Naruto leaning against the one adjacent to it as the player had already finished changing and made his way over to another room to wait for the team meeting to begin. The blonde had to admit, being best friends with Krum had its perks. While everyone was outside being deafened by each other's screaming, he was with the team. He couldn't stay for the meetings, of course, but prior to that he was allowed a few minutes to chat and mingle with the players. He could only imagine how much money high-ranking officials and fans of the game would pay to be in his position. Do you regret not joining the Quidditch team? Victor asked as he tightened up his forearm guards. We could have been sharing the biggest stage together, he said, clenching a fist in front of him. Naruto snorted to himself. While the man didn't show much emotion at school, when it came to Quidditch, he was a completely different man. Shaking his head, Naruto shoved his hands into the pockets of his pants. You know, Quidditch isn't my game, he replied calmly. It's fun for recreation, but it wasn't really my sport. Besides, even if I did play, you guys are facing Ireland. I still wouldn't be playing. Krum gave him a look of disbelief and muttered something in Bulgarian. Naruto wasn't able to catch what he said, but he knew it wasn't anything good, meaning he'd successfully gotten under the man's skin again. You're one of the few people who can keep up with me on a broom, the Bulgarian replied. Anyone capable of that can't claim the game isn't their sport. If you played, I know you would have been able to lead England to the finals. He finished. Naruto sighed. Fine, it just doesn't interest me all that much. I'm good at it, but I don't particularly like it. What you feel for Quidditch is what I feel for the dueling circuit. Free-falling into a dive to potentially miss the snitch doesn't sound that appealing to me, he replied, pushing himself off of the locker. Victor laughed at his declaration and patted the slightly shorter blonde on the back. As it usually did, the man's large hand connected with his back, making him stumble forward slightly. Do you always have to do that? He grumbled with no real malice in his voice. Do you know how big your hand is? His reply only caused the Bulgarian to laugh more, making him shake his head in exasperation. You'll be fine, he replied as he grabbed his broom. The team meeting is about to start, I'll see you after the game. Naruto nodded and held a fist outward, prompting Krum to bump it with his own. Turning around, he exited the room and made his way towards where the Krum family would be watching the event. Like most of the officials and rich folk, the Krum family had exceptionally good seats in order to watch their son perform at the highest level. The noise grew louder the closer he got until he could no longer hear himself think. It wasn't the top box where the Minister for Magic and high-ranking officials were, but just slightly beneath them. Naruto could understand why they didn't have the best opinion of Cornelius Fudge and preferred not to be in there with him. Standing at the edge of the arena overlooking the center of the field, he waited patiently, making small talk with Victor's father. After a few minutes, the two teams finally took their places. First, the Irish team flew out in a well-practiced manner, illuminating the sky with fireworks that took the form of a giant leprechaun. The Irish fans cheered loudly while they flew around the field until they came to a halt. Next, the Bulgarian team flew through the fireworks, destroying the leprechaun. The majority of the arena roared in excitement as they saw Victor Crumb flying. The man raised a fist in response to the chants and nodded. The excitement was through the roof and the fans couldn't wait for the match to begin. The crowd soon went silent as a voice was heard through the arena. "Good evening," bellowed the English minister. "As Minister for Magic, it gives me great pleasure to welcome each and every one of you to the final of the 422nd Quidditch World Cup. Let the match begin." The two teams began the final match of the World Cup and everyone leaned forward almost instantly. Though Bulgaria was a very strong competitor, Ireland had proven over and over again that they were to be feared, having flattened their opponents in the semi-finals. To prove this, Ireland had scored the first goal of the match and had taken an early lead. The Bulgarian fans were not deterred even a little bit, and cheered loudly, giving their team motivation. Naruto's eyes darted left and right across the field, watching the teams pass the quaffle to one another at incredible speeds. Their movements were so fluid that the announcer of the match only had time to say the players' names, and by the time he finished, they had already given the quaffle up. As the time passed by, Ireland's lead only continued to grow, and it was seemingly turning into a blowout. The fans hadn't lost their zeal and held on to hope in the form of a small golden ball. Crumb was the best seeker in the world, and by this point, many had their hopes on that being the key to victory. As the match continued with Ireland continuing to expand their lead, a golden wisp caught the attention of some within the stadium. The snitch had been sighted and the two seekers began their head-to-head battle to catch it. For Ireland, catching the snitch would all but lock in their World Cup aspirations. For Bulgaria, it would mean they could take the lead, and once they did, it was almost impossible to take it back. While not the biggest fan of the sport, the blonde found himself tracking the snitch along with everybody else. His heart was pounding in his chest as the two seekers extended their hands once they were close enough. "Come on, Victor," Naruto muttered to himself. "You've caught them in each match, get it done." The small ball continued to evade capture for an agonizing amount of time until finally, the moment came. "Crumb has the snitch," the announcer yelled in excitement. The scoreboard was updated, displaying the 150 points that had been awarded to the Bulgarian national team. The excitement soon died, however, as fans realized that time was running out and Ireland still had a 10-point lead. Knowing that they only had to hold out for a few seconds, the Irish team simply played a game of keep-away until the match was over. Crumb's family deflated, as did he, knowing they were so close. Still, despite the loss, everyone was proud. He'd done his job to the best of his abilities, but in the end it wasn't enough. That's just the way things were sometimes. What followed suit was the presentation of the World Cup up in the top box, and soon after, everyone was allowed to exit the stadium. The fans, however, didn't leave the field. They wanted to celebrate their victory. Some Bulgarian fans stayed to have a good time despite the loss, while others made their way home. Naruto followed the Crumbs to their tent that was set up along the field with the others. Now that the game was over, the area was flooded with people laughing, cheering, and plenty of drinking. Sidestepping a drunken man as he stumbled by, Naruto shook his head and was about to enter the tent. He could hear people chatting amongst themselves and even a few people talking to Crumb. Just as he reached for the flap to enter, he stopped as someone caught his attention. Just across the field, he caught sight of someone he hadn't seen in years. Forgetting about the celebration for the time being, he slowly made his way over. The young woman was talking with two men who seemed to be struggling to speak. The way they looked at her showed that they had no idea what they were doing. The look on her face was one of barely concealed annoyance. He chuckled to himself as he watched her try to keep her composure. Deciding to save her from the situation she was in, Naruto walked up to the trio, the attention turning towards him. The woman looked at him, eyes wide with recognition, and smiled. "I'm sorry, gentlemen, but I'm afraid I will have to cut my conversation short," Fleur said in her native French tongue. The two Frenchmen gave him hard stares, upset that their conversation with the beautiful witch had been interrupted. He could hear them muttering something that he knew wasn't pleasant. His French wasn't up to fluent level, but he could recognize curse words when someone said them. Now alone, the two stared at each other for a moment in silence until Naruto spoke. "Fleur. It's been a while, you look great," he complimented with sincerity. Fleur Delacour wore a light blue modest dress that had surely been modified with a few warming charms. She had a black cardigan-style sweater over the top and a scarf covering her neck. "Naruto," she replied softly. The blonde wouldn't tell her, but the slight French accent that was present in her tone was something he very much enjoyed. "It's been just over 3 years since we've last seen each other. You've grown." I have to look up to you now. Having grown up with her, he was used to the Villa allure, unlike most. It was present, more so now that she was almost at full maturity, but it was still rather easy for him to brush it aside. Fleur of course noticed this and was inwardly shocked that he could still resist. The only man she'd met that could do such a thing was her father. Well, I grew a bit over the past 3 years, he replied. I also have been learning other things, he attempted to say in French. His efforts were rewarded by the gleaming smile of the Villa, who seemed ecstatic that her childhood friend was making an effort to talk to her in her tongue. Her English wasn't great, but it was good enough, just the effort alone meant a lot to her. It can use some work, but I'm glad you're learning, she replied smoothly in French. Naruto took a second to deconstruct the sentence, and translate it back to English before nodding. Bulgaria? She asked back in English, looking at his jersey. Yeah, I have to support my friends, you know? He replied. Looking over in the direction of the tent, he noticed Crumb's father step outside and glance around before nodding at him and re-entering. Are you staying long? We are. My father is enjoying his time away from work and my mother is making sure he doesn't drink too much. Gabrielle didn't come this time, so I'm on my own, she replied. Smiling at the answer, he spoke. Would you like some company? He asked. Fleur turned her nose upward in false haughtiness and crossed her arms as she pretended to think. I suppose that wouldn't be too bad. Seeing as you haven't written to me for a while, we can use this to catch up, she said in an accusatory tone. For the first time since they began to talk, Naruto felt bad. They used to write every day, even if nothing interesting was going on. Seeing each other's letters would be enough of a reason to do it. Once he'd begun dipping into different magics and runes, however, he was ashamed to say his letters had become more scarce. I'm sorry, he replied in French. That won't happen again, I promise, he replied, staring her dead in the eyes. The woman held his stare, as if trying to read his emotions through his eyes. He'd never broken a promise to her yet, and she had no reason to believe he would start now. Fine, she said in her false arrogant tone. Where will we be going? Laughing at her attitude, he led her in the direction of the tent, doing his best to avoid everyone else. She repeated her question only for it to be unanswered once more. She had never liked being ignored, not as a little girl and definitely not now, but Naruto was unbothered. Moving the flap aside, he motioned for her to enter. Fleur thanked him and stepped inside only to pause and stare at him with a mild degree of surprise. Are we in the Bulgarian team's tent? She asked. Naruto nodded. Yeah, my best friend plays for the team. Come on, he's probably wondering where I ran off to. Taking her by the hand, he led her to where Victor was speaking with some of his teammates, only to turn his attention away from them when he saw Naruto approaching. Finishing his drink, he said something to them and began making his way over to meet them. Victor. That was a hell of a game. The Bulgarian nodded but didn't seem pleased about the loss, understandably so. It was, but we didn't play well enough. The next World Cup is ours, he declared proudly. It will if you play like you did today. Better make sure your teammates all share the same sentiment though. Anyway, he trailed off. Victor, I'd like to introduce you to someone. Fleur stepped forward and extended a hand. A pleasure. Fleur Delacour. Taking her much smaller hand in his, Victor shook it before releasing. Victor Crumb, he replied before pausing. He then turned to look at Naruto with a pensive look on his face before it lit up as he remembered something. I've heard about you, he revealed, much to Naruto's dismay. Fleur seemed delightfully surprised and turned to look at Naruto with a teasing smile. Really? She asked interestedly. Victor nodded, completely unbothered by the look his friend was sending him. Plenty of times. Naruto has spoken well of you. Before the man could continue, Naruto stepped in between them with a fake smile on his face. Well, I just wanted the two of you to meet. Feel free to go back with your team, Victor. We're going to get some drinks, he finished. But I want to know what you said about me. Fleur whined with a grin on her face. Naruto didn't miss the smirk the Bulgarian man sent his way as he dragged the woman elsewhere, and made a mental note to get back at him somehow. The two found a nice spot near one of the corners of the tent to chat amongst themselves. Their conversations came as easily now as they did back then, and they soon began chatting about what they'd been up to over the past 3 years. He learned that she was extremely talented in charms and could even perform a few spells nonverbally, something only a few people could do proficiently. He was one of those people, however his method was a bit more barbaric. He recounted stories of events that had gone on over in Durmstrang, and what kind of plans he had after graduation. An hour passed between them before Fleur realized her family would start to worry. Taking it upon himself to make sure she made it safely, he walked her back to where her parents would be and once again promised to write to her. He was caught slightly off guard when the Vila grabbed his arm and pulled him back towards her before he could walk off. Her arms wrapped around him gently, pulling him into a warm embrace, one that he happily returned. "Don't forget to write to me," she reminded him. "Or you could come visit sometime. Mother would love to see you again," she proposed. "I'd love to. During the next break I'll go," he promised as he let go of her. Walking back towards the tent, he felt happier than he had in a while. Not even the now drunken wizards who were fighting in front of one of the tents could ruin it. While they couldn't, there was certainly something that could. A large explosion sounded off in the distance, and flames erupted shortly thereafter. The explosions continued to go off, getting closer and closer before he saw streaks of different colored lights flying through the campsites. Tents began to empty as the masses began to panic and attempt to leave the area safely. The crowd of people running around blocked his view as he tried to pinpoint where the attacks were coming from. One moment a spell would come from his left, then his right, then behind in sporadic patterns. "They're attacking from all sides," he realized angrily. Shoving a drunken man aside, he caught a glimpse of a group of men and women dressed in black robes with ornate masks covering their faces. The group continued to fire spells in all directions, seemingly taking pleasure in the havoc they were causing. "Naruto. What's going on?" Victor asked, stopping next to him. He was standing in a battle-ready position with his wand firmly in his right hand. "Well, the venue is being attacked," he replied simply. "See those guys in the black robes? They're all around us. They seem to be targeting certain people and attacking the area to cause people to panic," he explained. "So they're after someone?" "A group of people," Naruto replied, taking note of an ordinary-looking man who was unfortunate enough to catch a nasty spell to the chest. The man wasn't a wizard, that much was certain, meaning they were targeting muggles. The field has had a number of spells cast on it to keep muggles out, but with the commotion some of them have gone down, and muggles have begun entering the area. Victor frowned at the words. He knew what that meant. Both of them had heard of a certain group that had gone around terrorizing muggles. How could they not? It was said that their own headmaster had been a part of the same group back in his younger years. "They're hunting muggles," the Bulgarian said angrily. While he didn't particularly care for them, he despised those who attacked the weak for fun. Those who did so behind a mask to hide themselves were even more pathetic in his opinion. "Yeah. Come on," Naruto ordered, running towards the group. The group up ahead must have been new to this as they stuck together instead of splitting up, making them easier targets. With blinding speeds, the tip of Naruto's wand began to glow before a bright red spell was fired off. Just behind it, a blue spell courtesy of the Bulgarian followed. Naruto's spell collided with the leg of the closest robed terrorist, cleanly slicing through the leg right beneath the knee. The man toppled over now that one leg was missing, and the blue flash of light was all the others saw before another one of their colleagues had their chest caved in. "Accio," Naruto muttered, pointing his wand at another robed wizard who had just caught his attention. Though the spell couldn't be used on a person directly, items on them such as clothing could propel them along with the item in question. "Victor," he added shortly after. Crumb fired off 2 more curses in another direction, managing to injure a pair of black robes in the middle of setting fire to more tents. Barely glancing in his direction, Victor flicked his wand in the direction of the wizard who now found himself flying in their direction. "Bombarda," the burly man said, letting the spell fly. Naruto didn't bother to see if the spell collided with the man or not. He knew it had done its job as the distinct sound of a person's rib cage breaking was heard from behind him when he ran forward, Crumb hot on his trail. The seeker covered the right side while he kept his attention on the left. Anyone wearing a black mask was quickly dealt with. Severing curses, overpowered reductos, blasting curses, anything they could fire that would cause severe injury, the 2 boys casted. In the span of 10 minutes each of them had taken down more than 20 masked men and women. "Accio," Naruto called out once more. The woman who had become the target of his summoning charm had tried to run away only to find herself flying towards the 2 Durmstrang students. The blonde took a step back and quickly transfigured a piece of wood that had been inside one of the tents into something akin to a spear. The witch flew past them, and with a sickening squelch, her leg was impaled by the piece of transfigured metal. Naruto and Victor stood above her, as she screamed in pain behind the mask but felt no sympathy. Kneeling down, the blonde easily lifted the mask to get a good look at the woman terrorizing the event. "You recognize her?" Naruto asked Crumb. The man shook his head. "I've never seen her before." "Me either." "Oh well." He shrugged. The headmaster might lose another friend. "Hey, what's your name?" he asked. The woman was too busy screaming to answer. Sighing to himself, Naruto stepped alongside her and kicked her leg off of the spike before casting a silencing charm on her. "There's enough yelling going on, I don't need her adding to it," the blonde said. "We can question her later," Victor replied, pointing his wand in front of him. It seemed that their actions had caught the attention of some of her allies. Not that it mattered much to them. The duels they had back in school against each other were more intense than this. These were clearly amateurs sent out to incite panic among the masses. Knowing they would be prime targets now, Naruto stood behind Crumb with his back against his and his wand pointed in the opposite direction. "Bombard!" and Naruto yelled out with full intention to cause damage. He was a firm believer in magic being about intention rather than being defined by a label. If you wanted something, your magic would respond in kind. The spell landed on the ground in front of 3 wizards, all of whom were catapulted into the air by the power behind the spell. Curse after curse was shot by the 2 boys, effectively mowing down the horde of masked wizards and witches that tried to go against them. Naruto on one side, Crumb on the other simply continued their 2-man assault on anyone donning the black clothes. By now most people had successfully evacuated the area and both of them noticed the number of masked cowards slowly dwindling. The fires had begun to snuff themselves out, leaving nothing but charred remains behind. Soon, one by one those able to began to apparate away from the scene, leaving with whatever little dignity they still had. Those unfortunate enough to be caught in the fight with the Durmstrang students found themselves quickly disarmed and beaten. "Expelliarmus!" Naruto yelled at one of the few remaining. The man's wand flew out of his hand and into Naruto's open one. Clenching his fist, the wand was cleanly snapped in 2, falling below into the small pile at the boy's feet. Seeing no other option, the man bolted away as fast as he could. "That's 9 for me," Naruto called out. Taking a breather, he glanced over his shoulder to see Crumb fire one last blasting spell at a woman. "8 for me," he replied. "Looks like they're done," Naruto pointed out, taking note of the mostly abandoned field. With the fires put out, the campsites were dark and charred. Smoke rose out of the few tents that were still somewhat standing, adding to the eerie atmosphere. Looking down next to the pile of broken wands, Naruto noticed the woman had finally stopped screaming and seemed to be reaching for her own wand. Just as she clenched it, he stepped forward, crushing her hand beneath his foot. "None of that now," Naruto chastised, adding a bit of pressure. Her fingers were forced to clamp around her own wand with the weight of his body until both the bones and wand broke. "She won't be able to speak if you continue," Crumb admonished. This was another reason the 2 got along so well. Both of them were of the same mind when it came to enemies. Having heard of the previous wars, the bloodshed and death, both the war waged by Voldemort and Grindelwald, they knew if it ever came down to it, stunners wouldn't cut it. Heeding the larger man's words, he removed his foot and undid the silencing spell he'd cast on her. Her screams were more subdued now, her throat long having exhausted itself. "So what was the point of all this?" Naruto asked in a hushed tone. "What were you trying to achieve?" The woman shook her head and refused to answer. Clicking his teeth in annoyance, he repeated the question, but once more she refused to give him anything to work with. She was loyal at least, he could give her that much. But loyal to who? The last Dark Lord had died years ago at the hands of Harry Potter, or rather some obscure magic. The thought that an infant barely old enough to stand by himself defeating the strongest dark wizard in recent history was absurd. He reapplied the silencing charm to her once more and pointed his wand down at her. "Wingardium Leviosa," he chanted silently. Forcefully removing her from the spike, he flicked his wand in the opposite direction and let her tumble onto the ground. The Aurors could deal with her when they finally arrived. "We should get out," Vikrit began, only to be cut off by the sound of a man speaking. More smorder they heard, followed by a flash of light making its way towards the night sky. The flash exploded, taking the image of a green skull with a snake coiling around it. "Harry, where are you, Harry?" they heard from another part of the area. "The boy who tries to get himself killed is here right now," Naruto noted. "But he couldn't have been the one who cast that," he said, pointing up at the sky. Victor agreed with his assumption. "It wouldn't make sense. We can think about it later. We should go before the English authorities arrive." With a silent pop, the 2 disappeared from their spots, just in time as the Aurors arrived on the scene. Had they stuck around, they would have likely been subjected to questioning and statements. Knowing how messed up the English system was, Naruto knew there was a chance they could have faced some sort of repercussions for what they did. On the evening of September 1st, while the students of Durmstrang were preparing to eat, the doors to the dining hall burst open, revealing the headmaster of the school. Igor Karkaroff was an imposing man to most, his face always set into a scowl, and when he smiled, his yellow teeth served to unsettle those in front of him. The students stood up, some reluctantly as a show of respect for the man, until he waved his hand, giving them permission to sit once more. Taking his place with the staff, Karkaroff didn't sit down, instead he cleared his throat and demanded everyone's attention. Pointing his wand up to his throat, Karkaroff silently chanted the incantation for a language translating spell before speaking. Naruto found it surprising that Karkaroff was considerate enough to do such a thing, considering he mostly cared for himself. Though with the amount of students coming from so many different countries, perhaps it was in an attempt to not make himself look bad when the students returned home on breaks. Your attention. Karkaroff began. The feast will commence after this announcement. It has been decided that the Triwizard Tournament will be reinstituted this year. Knowing better than to begin chatting amongst themselves, the students remained quiet, though everyone could see the excitement beginning to show in each other's faces. The tournament was notorious for being extremely dangerous, to the point where competitors dying was a regular occurrence. More than once had all the champions participating died in the tasks required. The tournament will take place at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. He resumed. As per the rules set by Headmaster Albus Dumbledore, only wizards and witches 6th year or higher may participate. The tournament will last the entire school year, with the trials being spread over a number of months. Naruto raised an eyebrow at that and shared a look with Victor, who seemed just as interested in the tournament as he did. Are we going to travel there every few months? He questioned himself. Hogwarts isn't exactly close by. 12 Durmstrang's best will accompany me to Hogwarts for the chance to be selected to participate. The winner will receive the Triwizard Cup, 1,000 galleons, and eternal glory. Karkaroff announced, showing his teeth in happiness. Not for the students, however, for the chance to boast about one of his being the winner. From the other side of the room, a 4th-year Russian student raised his hand. Headmaster. He began in English, though his accent was far stronger than even Crumb's. How will schooling work for those selected if they won't be here? Headmaster Dumbledore has been gracious enough to allow us the use of vacant classrooms within the castle for continued education. We are also allowed to sit into classes they teach, assuming you take those classes here, he replied. Naruto took note of the almost scathing way he referred to the man who was considered the strongest wizard in the world at the moment. Now then, those of you who wish to participate, see Professor Branimir after the feast. We will depart on the 30th of October. He finished, taking his seat. As usual, food appeared in vast quantities on the table in front of them, and everyone was quick to dig in. Now, without the threat of being punished for speaking out of turn, the students began to animatedly talk amongst themselves about the tournament. Picking out his favorites, Naruto filled his plate as much as he could and began eating. It seems we will be going to Hogwarts for the year, Victor said to him, swallowing a bite of his food. Looks like it. Neither man had missed the way Karkaroff had looked in their direction when mentioning 12 students. Most had a choice, but it was clear he expected the 2 of them to join. Not that it mattered, he had already decided he would be participating. The tournament is also between Beaux-Baton in France. Victor continued. Your friend might be there. Naruto's mood heightened slightly at the thought of Fleur. She was a talented witch, one that he knew had what it took to be chosen for a tournament like this. That meant she would likely be one of the people either he or Victor would be facing off against. He grinned lightly at the thought. She would definitely be someone to be reckoned with in the future, but he wanted to see how strong she was now. Yeah, she will. Looks like I'll have to use these earlier than I had planned to, he said, lifting his arms slightly. To anyone around, they just looked like his arms covered by the sleeves of his brown uniform. Victor, however, knew exactly what he had hidden beneath the sleeves and the bandages the blonde wore. The Bulgarian took a sip of his beverage and shook his head. You're the only bastard I know crazy enough to do that to yourself, he said with mild amusement. I'm not sure what's crazier, you trying it or it working. Getting back to his food, Naruto shrugged. It was a gamble, but it paid off. Anyway, if I'm chosen, I guarantee you I'll win, he said with determination. Don't worry, if you're not chosen, I'll get it done, Victor shot back. September and most of October flew by. Classes continued on like normal until the final week of the month. There had been over 60 people who submitted their name in the hopes of going to Hogwarts. In the end, as expected, Naruto and Victor had been the first 2 to be accepted. 10 other students, 5 6th years and 5 7th years, had also been deemed good enough to go. Now, with their necessities packed, the students began boarding the large ship that would travel across the waters. It was a grandiose wooden ship covered from end to end in enchantments to ensure safe travels. The ship had a large white sail, proudly displaying the crest of Durmstrang for all to see. Once everyone was inside and all final checks had been made, the departure began. Naruto was thankful he wasn't one to get seasick, as there was a little rocking before everything stabilized. A handful of hours later, after navigating underwater, they finally arrived at their destination. The ship made its ascension upwards, breaking the surface and covering the surrounding area with a large splash. Karkaroff was the first to exit, followed by Crumb, and then himself. All 12 students were dressed relatively the same in a brown-colored uniform with 2 buttons on the left-hand side of the chest. Karkaroff wore a long white jacket, held together at the waist along with a fur hat to keep his head warm. Crumb wore the brown uniform, only he had a greenish coat over his with fur covering the inside and a similar fur hat. Naruto meanwhile sported a long jacket, also held together at the waist by a black belt. Though his jacket was more like a double-breasted coat with 6 buttons along the chest, 3 on each side. Unlike the rest, he opted for no hat, letting everyone see his spiky blonde hair. So this is Hogwarts, Crumb muttered as Karkaroff went in to greet the other headmaster. It's a nice castle, Naruto complimented. Looks much livelier than Durmstrang, that's for sure. Karkaroff turned to his students and had them stand at attention to listen to Dumbledore's directions. It seemed they would need to have a grand entrance, which explained the staffs Karkaroff had brought along. While he wasn't one for dramatics, he supposed it could have been worse. With that thought, he and his classmates were led away. As they walked, he couldn't help but think to himself what this school year would be like. Standing just outside the large doors that led into what Dumbledore called the Great Hall, the students of Durmstrang stood patiently while the aged wizard conversed with their headmaster. Naruto's eyes followed the man who defeated Grindelwald, and found it difficult to believe this was him. He of course knew one's appearance had nothing to do with their ability, but it was still weird to see a man this powerful dressed like the wizards from the Muggle shows. Why do you think we need to put on a performance? Naruto asked Crumb in a hushed tone, his head not turning so as to not draw Karkaroff's attention. And when can we go inside? It's still cold even inside the castle, he complained, stuffing his hands into his jacket pockets. I'm not sure, Crumb responded in English. It hadn't been long, but since the announcement of the tournament, Crumb had spent a lot of time practicing his English. His heavy accent was of course still there, but he'd definitely improved. As for the castle, there are warming charms in place, and you're still cold? He questioned. The taller man then looked at Naruto's head and tried not to grin. I told you should have worn the hat. Everyone else has, for this reason alone, he added. I can transfigure one for you if you'd like, he offered, knowing he wouldn't accept. Naruto declined with a vehement shake of his head. I'll pass. Those hats look ridiculous, he said, looking over at his other classmates as well. Both the men and 2 women that had been brought along rolled their eyes at the blonde's words. Needless to say, it wasn't the first time they'd had the hat discussion. Maybe, Crumb uttered. But we're warm while your ears are turning blue. When you're ready, let me know and I'll happily make one for you, he said. In a childish display, Naruto glanced to the side to check what Karkaroff was doing at the moment. The cowardly man was picking at his teeth with the nail of his thumb, paying no attention to what was going on around him. Seeing that the coast was clear, Naruto turned to Crumb and left only the middle finger of his right hand remaining up, while the rest were put down. To most of the students, it was a rare sight to see Naruto and Victor joking around and behaving like regular people. Their reputations within the school had put them on something of a pedestal. Karkaroff had all but made them the faces of Durmstrang and wanted their image to present power, skill, and ferocity. To that end, the 2 men had been held to a higher standard on how to present themselves. Stoic and serious, that's all most of the students back home ever saw of them. In the few moments, however, where they were allowed to break that facade, people were given a glimpse into the real them, and everyone agreed they were better this way. Naruto thought it was stupid that he had to come across as an emotionless wizard ready to strike anyone down, but then again, most if not all of Karkaroff's ideas made little to no sense. You all remember what to do? Karkaroff asked, making all eyes turn to him. The students nodded. Good. While I think this is an idiotic task, it's a tradition nonetheless. We are to enter in exactly 1 minute, I expect perfection, the headmaster said in his usual tone. Naruto closed his eyes to conceal the way they rolled at the man's words. It was just an entrance, nothing more than an announcement of their presence at the prestigious school. The headmaster cast a silent spell to check how much time was left, and with a wave of his hand, the students straightened up. The headmaster led the charge, and with a small blast of magic, the large doors were forced open. A dramatic boom was heard throughout the hall, and all eyes were on them. Karkaroff marched in with Crumb on his right and Naruto on his left. Among the sea of black uniforms, sitting along one of the nearby tables, was a small patch of blue. His eyes were easily able to spot Fleur out among her classmates. Fleur stared back at him with a smile in place and waved slowly at him. The angry facade he wore for the introduction broke for a split second to return the look, but just as quickly, it was back in place. Staring ahead towards the end of the hall, he noticed with a confused frown that Crumb and Karkaroff were walking a bit too fast. They were a solid 2 steps ahead of him. I thought we were marching, not jogging, he thought to himself, slightly irritated at not having been informed of the speed. Seeing it was too late to catch up now, he continued marching at his own pace. His classmates were doing a phenomenal job with the large staffs they were using. Sparks went off on his left and right due to the show being put on, and in front of him, 2 classmates making a show of acrobatic skill, all while continuing forward. They easily maneuvered around him despite having only practiced the routine twice while on the ship. Just as he was steps away from reaching Crumb and Karkaroff, a large flaming sigil of Durmstrang was created in the air. The animated sigil dispersed just as he was a step away from walking through it. Flying high into the air, it blew up in a shower of sparks. The 10 students stood proudly while Naruto, Crumb, and Karkaroff stood a few feet to the side of them with no clear emotion on their faces. The way they were forced to be apart from his classmates rubbed the blonde the wrong way. They should all be united, sharing the stage equally, but instead the headmaster chose to have them by his side. In a way, it felt like they were display pieces. A round of applause for the proud sons and daughters of Durmstrang, Dumbledore announced. The students of both Hogwarts and Beauxbatons clapped politely for the Durmstrang delegation. Some, like a certain redhead in one of the far tables, clapped extra loud, though his eyes were exclusively on Crumb. It seems you have a fan, Crumb, Naruto muttered loud enough for the man to hear him. He knew Victor didn't mind it, but superfans were what got under his skin. The words didn't have an outward reaction, but he knew he'd heard him. He's looking at you a little too closely, I think, Naruto continued. I actually don't think he realizes anyone else is here. Those from Hogwarts and Beauxbatons who had their eyes on the 2 looked on in confusion as Crumb's facial expressions slowly changed. His angry look began to disappear, and those close enough could see him begin to bite the inside of his cheek. While Dumbledore spoke, Naruto continued to mutter loud enough for Victor to hear him, and if he was lucky his facade would break. Unfortunately, just as the blonde was certain Victor would laugh, they were instructed to sit down. While Fleur and Beauxbatons were seated with the black and blue uniformed Hogwarts students, they sat next to them with the green and silver wearing students. He of course knew the Slytherin's less than stellar reputation. Not the current students per se, but due to what had happened in the past few years. Lord Voldemort and his ilk had been predominantly from this very house, at least the important players. He could feel their eyes on him and his classmates, though most of them were on the Bulgarian. Understandably so, he was the headliner for most Quidditch matches he played. People paid small fortunes for the opportunity to see him chase and catch a snitch. At the end of the table, there were 12 open seats, 6 on each side of the table. As he walked down the aisle to his seat, his eyes once again wandered over to where Fleur was seated. Just like at the World Cup, he noticed that most if not all of the guys could hardly control themselves. Their eyes were seemingly glazed over and were looking at the Frenchwoman with hungry eyes. They have no resistance to the allure, he thought to himself. Fleur looked up and silently pleaded for him to help her with her gaze. Nothing short of taking her to his table would solve the problem to a degree, but he figured he could at least do something. Quickening his pace, he passed the open seats and made his way towards her. I knew I would find you here, he told her in French, standing just off to her side. Fleur smiled widely, still inwardly giddy that he was learning French presumably for her sake. She would be correct, but he wouldn't confirm that. Standing up and flattening the skirt of her uniform, she turned around to face him and pulled him into her arms, completely disregarding the fact that everyone was watching. Wrapping his arms around her body, he chuckled. They can't stop staring at you, what are you going to do? He asked, letting go of her. They can stare all they want. I simply ignore them, she replied before looking over his shoulder and frowning lightly. We can talk more later, it looks like your headmaster isn't too happy that we're talking. Looking over his shoulder, he saw that she was right. Karkaroff was staring angrily in his direction, while some of his classmates looked at him with raised eyebrows. It wasn't that he was unpopular with the ladies back at Durmstrang, but they had never seen him go out of his way to seemingly flirt with someone. Promising to get back to her, he made his way to the Slytherin table where a single open seat was vacant next to Crumb. You should know Karkaroff was upset at the little show with your friend, Victor said with a smirk. He told me to get you under control while we're here. Naruto mirrored his smirk and tapped his fingers along the wooden table. What did you tell him? He asked, genuinely curious. How? What did he tell you? He stared at me and stayed quiet, then went to talk to Dumbledore. Naruto couldn't stop the chuckle that escaped him. He was sure the man was fuming on the inside, but so long as they weren't in Durmstrang, he couldn't really enforce much of his personality-killing ways. If he wanted to show affection to a long-time friend like Fleur, he would do so. Karkaroff be damned. You know he's probably going to punish you when we get back to school, right? Naruto turned to his right-hand side where a female classmate of his was giving him a knowing look. He shrugged. He'll forget about it by then. Besides, when Victor or I win the tournament, he'll be too busy gloating about his prize students and the superior teachings of Durmstrang. Settling down, he surveyed the table and took note of anyone from prominent families. While he didn't spend much time around here, he still made it a point to know who was who. On the side opposite of him and Victor, there were a few people worth noting. One he recognized as Theodore Knott, heir of the Knott family. Other than having their hands in a few businesses, the only thing worth noting about them was that they were a pure-blood family that sided with Voldemort during the First War, tried and true pure-blood supremacists. His eyes moved down the table and found someone else. Blaise Zabini. He'd met him once or twice when he lived here. From what he remembered, he was a quiet kid if not vain. He noted how he seemed content to simply sit and listen, not contributing to the conversations but definitely taking everything in. Those were the ones one needed to keep an eye on. Would he be a threat in the future? Probably not, but it wouldn't hurt to be vigilant. Finally, the last person that had made it onto his radar was sitting right across from Victor. A light blonde-haired student wearing a proud look on his face as he conversed with two classmates. Draco Malfoy. Whereas the other two students weren't much to talk about, Draco was another matter. His family was prominent, rich, and fully in support of the Dark Lord during his reign. When it comes to dark families, one would usually think of Malfoy. Whatever he was talking about seemed to fly over his classmates' heads as they simply blinked and then nodded. Naruto shook his head. If that was the company he was keeping, he highly doubted they ever looked out for him whenever he came up with some half-assed idea. Glancing at Victor, the two looked back at Draco, who had just finished talking with his classmates, and was now looking directly at them. Well, not them exactly, but rather the world-famous Bulgarian seeker. So he began. What do you lot think of Hogwarts? A bit droll, I think, but eventually it grows on you. Victor swallowed his food and simply replied. It's fine. Draco blinked, waiting for the man to continue, and cleared his throat when he realized he wasn't getting any more from him. I'll say this much, you were definitely placed at the best table in the school. The Ravenclaws I suppose aren't so bad, but the Lions and the Puffs? He asked, making a disgusted face while turning his nose up. What's wrong with them? Naruto asked, slightly interested. He'd heard from his grandma about the different houses, but as the head of Gryffindor, he had to assume she had some bias. He was certain Draco would have his own towards his house, and to a degree the Ravenclaws, but he wanted to hear whether he'd have valid complaints or belief-backed ones. Draco, as well as those around him who were trying to listen to the conversation between him and Crumb, turned to look at him. None of them were ignorant to the fact that they were good friends, as seen by what had happened during their introductions. Victor, for his part, stared at the Hogwarts students with a look, wanting to see how they would treat his friend. They'd all treated him like a superstar, complimenting his skills and such as soon as he sat down. Now he would see what they were really like by observing their interactions with someone who wasn't known, at least to some. Draco, having been trained in the delicate field of politics and relationship building, didn't hesitate to answer his question. The Gryffindors are Dumbledore's favorites, so no matter what they do or what rules they break, I can assure you they'll be rewarded for it, he replied, getting some nods from those around him. The Puffs, well, they're not really good at much. They're loyal to their own, which I suppose I can get behind, but other than that they really don't have much going for them. Naruto turned around to look at the Gryffindor table, and his eyes quickly spotted Harry Potter. The man was talking to the same red-headed guy who was staring at Crumb like he was a god when they walked in. Even now, while Harry spoke to him, he was looking in Victor's direction. What do you think, Crumb? If you were to enroll here, what house do you think you'd be in? Draco asked, once again trying to make conversation. The blonde noticed how Victor seemed to be getting annoyed by the conversations and remembered how he told Fleur that he'd spoken of her in the past. A mischievous smile formed on his face, and he cleared his throat, ready to pay his friend back. I think you'd definitely fit right in with the Puffs, Naruto said, looking at his friend. The burly Bulgarian stopped his chewing and glanced at him through narrowed eyes. The Slytherin students around them blinked and then frowned at the words. Of course they were hoping Victor would reply with Slytherin, and to a degree they wouldn't be wrong. Victor was ambitious and cunning when he needed to be. All he needed was to draw a slightly larger crowd of students to enact the next part of his plan. His words had the desired effect, as even those a bit further down the table had turned their heads in their direction. Are you daft? Draco asked, though without the usual snark in his voice. He would most certainly be a Slytherin. Unsurprisingly, his classmates agreed with him. To his delight, Victor also nodded as the traits of the house certainly resonated within him. Yeah, I guess you're right. I was going for the loyal aspect, but I suppose given what he's done to reach the level he's at in Quidditch, he'd need plenty of ambition and cunning. Draco nodded. An honest mistake, I'm sure. This is too easy, Naruto thought to himself, trying to hide his smile. His ambition really shines on the Quidditch pitch, that's for sure, he said before turning to look at his friend. Victor, tell them about the time you had that friendly match against Algeria and you caught the snitch. Victor frowned at the command. There was no such match against Algeria that he could recall. What was so special about him catching the snitch? Not asked in a haughty tone. He does it all the time. Smiling at the man but frowning at him on the inside, Naruto replied. Well, other than the fact that he jumped off the broom to catch the snitch? He shot back. All eyes turned to Victor, mentally imagining what the play would look like in real time. He jumped off the broom? Draco asked, just as shocked. Wouldn't he be knocked out if he did that? Naruto shook his head. If you're hit with a bludger or fall off, you're knocked out. He willingly jumped off, so the rule wasn't enforced. He caught the snitch, and won the game soundly because of it. I've never seen anything like it before, to tell you the truth. Suddenly, all the attention was off him and the Slytherins were bombarding Victor with tons of questions. Why did he feel the need to do it? What happened after? How did he land? Does he still have the snitch? Can they get the memory of it to show others? Victor turned to look at him with an annoyed look and a silent question in his stare. Why? Leaning over so that only he could hear him, he spoke. You shouldn't have told Fleur that I talked to you about her. Having accomplished what he had set out to do, Naruto focused all his attention on the food in front of him. While the Slytherin table was fawning over the mythical accomplishments of Crumb, the staff table at the front of the Great Hall was immersed in their own conversation. I must say, it makes me glad to see the students getting along so well, Professor Dumbledore said as he watched the Slytherin students chatting with those from Durmstrang. Karkaroff looked over at the table in question and nodded, still slightly miffed about the scene one of his students had caused. More than that, you definitely have two of the most gifted students of this generation under your banner, Headmaster Karkaroff. A professional Quidditch player and back-to-back dueling champion, Professor Flitwick commented. His eyes were specifically trained on the blonde next to Victor Crumb. The man grinned, something those around him wished he didn't do. Yes, Crumb and McGonagall are the best students to have walked the halls of Durmstrang in years. I say we have the best chance of winning the Triwizard Tournament, he replied in a proud tone. It would do you well not to underestimate the Hogwarts students' headmaster, McGonagall responded curtly. Though she wasn't fond of the man her great-grandson called headmaster, she was proud that he was held in such high regard. We've had some of the finest wizards in history learn from this very school. Flitwick and surprisingly, even Snape nodded. Though that does make me remember something. Flitwick spoke. I assume both Victor Crumb and Naruto McGonagall will be entering the tournament. We must discuss how your great-grandson's skills might need to be toned down a bit, he said, looking towards Minerva. Why is that? Karkaroff added with a frown. The Triwizard Tournament is a competition for the best each school has to offer. His skills add to his chances? Flitwick raised his hands in a placating manner. I'm not saying he limits the amount of spells he uses or anything of the sort. I'm merely referring to the power output behind the spells when facing off against other students. Professor Dumbledore stroked his beard in thought. As the host of the tournament, he'd of course been briefed on all the tasks that would take place on his grounds. That included the final challenge that would determine the winner of the tournament. Students would likely end up facing each other at some point, and that's where the danger lied. Among regular students, the encounters were dangerous, but with someone like the blonde, the students were in far more danger than ever. I see your point, Professor. Dumbledore spoke. We have plenty of time before the first event is to take place. Igor, you understand the safety of the students is our primary concern. I can promise you, however, if your student is picked, he will not be given a handicap that will put him in an unfavorable position. The tournament will still be balanced and fair for all involved. The Durmstrang headmaster frowned but nodded. Fine. However, I must agree to whatever restrictions are imposed. If I feel that we're put at a disadvantage, we will pull out of the tournament and refrain from entering in the future. The headmistress of Bosbaden's, who had been silent up until then, spoke next. I'm sure things will be fine, Karkaroff. Assuming he's picked, we should also see if the rules bother him at all, she said with her slight French accent showing through. I imagine it would be a good look for him if he made it far even with some restrictions on him, she added, trying to appeal to his pride. Karkaroff didn't reply, instead looking over at his students. He was certain they could win no matter what the odds, but that didn't mean he was happy about it. As much as he wanted to ignore it, he couldn't help but think how much better his school would look with a champion that had won even at a disadvantage. "So Fleur, when were you going to tell us you had a boyfriend?" Eleanor, her best friend within the school, asked in their native tongue. They didn't want any eavesdroppers after all. The other girls looked on in interest, wondering what the woman would say. From the moment they saw her hugging the boy from Durmstrang, Fleur knew the next few hours would be full of questions. Fleur felt her cheeks begin to heat up at the question but shook her head. "He's not my boyfriend. He's an old friend I met a few years ago. I hadn't seen him for a while until we met again at the World Cup." None of the girls believed her. All of them wore looks of skepticism. To them, that hug lasted longer than a friendly hug would. "I have to say, Fleur, you definitely have high standards for men," another one of her classmates replied. "A dueling champion, kind of hard for other guys to compete with." The quarter Vila tilted her head slightly to the side and moved a strand of hair behind her ear. "Dueling champion?" she asked. The women around looked at her, as if she'd grown a second head. That was her friend and she didn't know. "I don't keep track of the dueling scene," she defended herself. "How good is he?" she asked. Eleanor took a sip of her drink and replied. "He's been competing in the adult dueling league since he was 16. He's the current repeat champion and will most likely be invited to duel in the World Dueling Tournament next year. From what I've seen of him, he's scary good with a wand." Fleur looked surprised and partially ashamed that she didn't know that about her friend. She made a mental note to ask her father the next time he was around to see if he knew any of this. Perhaps she would go watch a match during the World Tournament. She noticed another one of her friends smile slyly at her, and could feel her eyes narrowing in her direction. Whatever she was about to say would not be appropriate. "I wonder if he's good with his other wand?" she asked out loud. Fleur buried her face in her hands and did her best to drown out the laughter at her expense. To her immense shame, she couldn't stop the barrage of mental images of her and her blonde friend finding out if the question was true or not. "She's thinking about it." The laughter increased and with it, her own embarrassment. Fortunately, it died down after a few short minutes and they were able to get back to a somewhat normal conversation. "Seriously, Fleur, if either him or Victor Crumb get selected, they'll probably be the most problematic opponents you end up against." "I know, but I'm confident in my own skills. I can win this no matter who gets selected," she replied with full confidence. Her friends nodded in agreement. No matter what happened, they would have her back. After the meal, Dumbledore clapped his hands, getting everyone's attention. "I hope you have all enjoyed the feast, for now it is time for those of you who wish to participate in the Triwizard Tournament to submit your names into the Goblet of Fire," he announced, waving his hand to the side. The large artifact was brought into the hall and placed in front of the man. The top of the goblet was lit up with bright blue fire. "For the safety of our students, only those of 6th year or higher will be allowed to participate," he continued. "To that end, I will be creating an age line that will restrict those who do not meet the qualifications to enter. You may leave and enter your name before the night ends if you wish, or you may stay and do so as soon as I'm finished." The hall was quiet with everyone hanging on to the man's words. Most were dejected that they wouldn't be allowed to compete while others were indifferent. "An age line seems a little too simple to keep someone out, doesn't it?" Naruto asked Crumb. Unfortunately, with how quiet the hall was, his words all but resonated throughout the room. Dumbledore looked over at him and smiled kindly, not at all bothered by the blonde's comments. "I assure you, my boy, the age line will be more than enough, that is, of course, unless you know of a better way," he finished with a slight challenging tone. Truth be told, he was also fascinated with the boy in the same way that Flitwick was. Young talent was to be nurtured so it could bloom, and he wanted to see how much talent the boy potentially had. All eyes turned to Naruto, who shrugged. "I have an idea, if you wouldn't mind, that is." Dumbledore put his wand down and motioned him to come forward. "Not at all. I'm curious as to what you have in mind." His steps resonated through the hall, and for the first time in a while, he felt his heart begin to pump with a bit of excitement. This would be the first time he used the spell he had in mind, and it would be a great message to send to the world. People knew his name in the dueling circuit, but that wasn't enough. Standing in front of the goblet, Naruto stared at it with a determined look and turned around, very much aware of the eyes of both the students and the staff on him. "So no one below 6th year. Should be simple enough to tweak the spell," he muttered to himself. "Protego Diabolica," he whispered. Dumbledore's eyes widened dramatically at the name of the spell. He was very much familiar with it as well as the last person he could remember that had cast it. Walking in a circular pattern around the goblet, a blazing blue fire roared to life around the perimeter of the artifact. Waving his wand as if he was conducting an orchestra, the fire sprang higher into the air, bending to its caster's desire. With a flick of the wand, the Durmstrang sigil was displayed high in the air before dispersing, leaving only the wild flames behind. "Victor," he called out. The Bulgarian shook his head at the display but was definitely impressed. He'd seen the spell used before but never in the same dramatic fashion as he had now. Stepping forward, those watching held their breaths in suspense only to let them out moments later when he stepped through the flames without so much as a scratch. The slip of paper was dropped into the goblet, which accepted it readily. Looking around, he noticed most of the Slytherin table looking on in shock, at least those that came from prominent families. It seemed to be the same case with the other houses except those in Gryffindor that knew of the spell seemed appalled that someone would use it. His great-grandma, on the other hand, looked downright cross. He recognized the look of anger on her face. He'd seen plenty of it in the past. Just as quickly as the spell had gone up, the flames were snuffed out with a simple wave of Dumbledore's wand. The smile he wore had long been replaced with an unreadable look, though the concern behind his eyes was not lost on him. "A truly magnificent display, young man," he said in a grandfatherly tone. "However, I will ask that spell not be used again. Place your name into the goblet if you wish to participate, but I will go ahead with the age line." Nodding, he placed his name into the cup and alongside Victor, made his way out of the hall. Looking at Fleur as he walked out, he was thankful that she didn't seem to be giving him an upset look. That spell was considered a dark charm, a foolish notion if there ever was one, but that's how things were, and she didn't seem to look at him in a different way. She mouthed, "We'll talk later," as he passed by, and he nodded. "Just one moment, young man," McGonagall called out, stepping next to Dumbledore. "What is it, Grandma?" he replied casually. The students of Hogwarts were affronted at the blatant disrespect he was showing one of their best professors. Though she was old, none dared call her that to her face, not even the Slytherins. "Please refrain from calling me that while we're on educational time," she chastised. "At the moment I'm not your grandmother but a professor of Hogwarts. Headmaster Karkaroff, might I borrow your student for a few minutes? I'd like to speak with him." Karkaroff nodded. "Take him." "I'll catch up with you on the ship," Naruto commented, following his grandmother as she left the hall. A few moving stair-sets later, Naruto was seated across from his grandmother, who was staring at him with disapproval clear on her face. "Would you mind explaining to me what you were doing pulling that stunt in the Great Hall?" Naruto shrugged. "Making a stronger deterrent to cheaters. People have died in the tournament, it wouldn't be too difficult for someone to find a way across the line and participate." The elderly professor sighed and let her age show as she rubbed her forehead. "That spell you used has a high negative connotation associated with it. Those who come from old families will likely tell their parents about it. But you didn't think about that, did you?" "Not exactly. You know I don't buy into any of that light and dark stuff. Magic has no alignment, it's all about what you intend to do with the magic that matters," he replied firmly. "Naruto, I know you don't care for this sort of thing, but here in Britain we have a problem with this kind of thing. I don't want people like Lucius Malfoy trying to get in your good graces, nor do I want Dumbledore to take too much of an interest in you the same way he seemingly has with Harry Potter," she said in a much softer tone. "I'm not stupid enough to believe Lucius Malfoy would have an interest in me for anything other than spells I can potentially teach him and his ilk. As for Dumbledore, well, I don't know enough about him to form a solid opinion quite yet." Knowing that was the best she'd get with him, McGonagall nodded. "As much as I wish you hadn't done something so idiotic, I suppose it could have been worse. Now tell me, how's your mother doing?" "She's all right, definitely against me participating in the tournament, but I think she eventually warmed up to the idea. I still think she hopes Victor gets chosen though," he replied with a laugh. "I can imagine why. You love to do things without thinking things through. Something tells me if you would have enrolled here, I would have been the head of your house," she said with a shudder at the thought. Frowning at the display, he leaned forward in his seat. "It's either here or Slytherin, to be honest. I have qualities of both, not sure which one I'd prefer though. Though I can also see myself having ended up in Ravenclaw. I do like learning new spells and finding out exactly how they work," he mused. The mention of Ravenclaw brought a glint into the older woman's eyes as she remembered the events before the feast took place. "Speaking of Ravenclaw, I couldn't help but notice you seemed to know one of the Bosbaden's girls that arrived today," she said with a knowing grin. Naruto smiled as the thought of Fleur entered his mind, unknowingly adding more fuel to the fire that was to come. Oh yeah, that's Fleur. She's one of my closest friends. We reconnected at the World Cup and have been keeping in touch. Oh, I'm sure. You were definitely in contact in the hall. I've never seen you so smitten over someone before. I'm sure your mother would love to see the memory. His grandmother teased. The way you held that young woman and spoke to her in French no less, that was something I never figured you were capable of. I take offense to that. I'm capable of a lot, he countered. McGonagall nodded in agreement. You are. When something suits you. But learning French was never one of your interests. You even called it boring when I recommended it. So to find out you did it for a girl, that's nothing short of remarkable. Naruto slumped into his seat, knowing it was a useless endeavor to convince his grandmother otherwise. Everything she said was true, and he could only imagine what the letter from his mother would be like once word reached her. Laughing at his embarrassment, the woman took pity on him and decided to change the conversation. Now, tell me about your studies. What courses are you taking at the moment? The rest of the time they had together was spent going over his classes and what his plans for the future were. He was also told that one of the professors, Flitwick, would surely reach out to him in the coming days. Naruto had no problem with that. He knew of the man and that he was one of the best duelists in the world back in his day. The opportunity to pick his brain and move himself up to the next level was something he wouldn't pass up. The next day after the Halloween feast, Dumbledore once again got everyone's attention. It is now time for selection of the champions, he called out. Waving his right hand across the room, the candles that were lit began to go out one by one until the room was illuminated by only the blue flames of the cup. Silence fell across the hall with only the embers of the flames making any noise. The blue light of the fire turned bright red for a moment before the flames rose, releasing a piece of parchment into the air. Catching it with little effort, Dumbledore brought the parchment up to eye level. The Durmstrang champion is Naruto McGonagall. Cheers erupted from his classmates, and even Victor, who had not been chosen, was quick to pat him on the shoulder. Do not embarrass us, he said in a joking tone. Laughing at the words, he nodded at everyone and finished shaking hands with his classmates. Walking up to the headmaster, he shook the man's hand and was led to an adjacent room just a few steps away. As he was making his way towards the door, the bright red light flashed through the room. As he entered through the doors, he couldn't help but smile in pride as Fleur's name was called out. Inside the room were 5 other people, 2 of which were the heads of his school and Bosbatons. Of the remaining 3 he recognized Ludovic Bagman, the head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports. Next to him was Bartimus Crouch Sr., and finally the sole woman of the trio and one of the most despised in England, Rita Skeeter. He stood in place until a moment later when Fleur joined him. No words were exchanged as they waited for the third and final champion to be named. His curiosity was satisfied when the door opened once more and a Hufflepuff student walked into the room and stood alongside them. Excellent. Now that the champions have been selected, we may. Bagman's words died in his throat as Dumbledore and Harry Potter entered the room. What is the meaning of this, Dumbledore? Karkaroff asked in an angry tone as he watched Harry Potter take his place alongside the other Hogwarts student. Dumbledore stared at everyone and uttered words that shocked most. Harry has been selected as the 4th champion by the goblet. Naruto turned towards the boy who lived and let out a small whistle. The man would be going into a tournament underprepared and against people much more experienced than him. He couldn't help but feel a little bad for the guy. Looking at Fleur, he noticed she seemed just as surprised and a bit upset as everyone else. It didn't matter to him how many champions there were, all that meant was there was one more person to beat. Harry Potter or not, he would be the Triwizard champion. Silence engulfed the room. Karkaroff, Madame Maxime, and even Dumbledore looked at Harry with doubt in their eyes. It was unheard of for a 4th competitor to enter the Triwizard tournament. In the entire history of the tournament, there had always been 3 competitors. Harry, Dumbledore began. You didn't have one of the older students put your name in the goblet, did you? He asked. Karkaroff scoffed. He must have. The boy probably couldn't help himself, he said with scorn. Naruto frowned at his headmaster's words. If anyone simply took a moment to think, they would realize he hadn't put his name in. Just the look on the younger man's face told the whole story. He was as surprised as everyone else. The question on Naruto's mind wasn't why his name had come out, but rather how. Looking over at Dumbledore, who was conversing with some of his staff who had just entered the room, he couldn't help but feel just a tiny bit smug. The corners of his mouth curled upwards at the thought in his head. Feeling a small bump against his side, he looked over to see both Fleur and Cedric staring at him with a questioning look. What's so funny? she asked quietly, not wanting to draw attention. Unfortunately, her question had the opposite effect and soon, everyone was looking their way. Coughing into his hand, he crossed his arms. I don't mean to sound petty, but this is the result of the age line. Now a 14-year-old is being forced to compete, he replied. He blinked and turned toward Bagman, who was watching the spectacle with excitement. Now that I think about it, couldn't he just withdraw or be disqualified since he doesn't meet the conditions for competing? He asked. Everyone turned towards the head of magical games and sports and saw him shake his head. Unfortunately, since he was picked by the goblet, he has no choice but to compete. To break the magical contract that has been created by the champions when they were picked could lead to serious repercussions, he warned. Karkaroff still looked unconvinced and scowled at both of the Hogwarts champions with disdain. I don't believe one word from the boy. Perhaps he couldn't resist trying his hand in order to prove himself. Naruto wanted to shake his head in exasperation. It was strange how much the man cared about the reputation of Durmstrang but seemed to care little for how this outburst was affecting his own. Don't you? Another voice cut in. Walking into the room was a man many were familiar with. He gave off a strong aura and definitely portrayed himself as one to not be messed with. The most noticeable thing about the man was his artificial left eye, which was no longer in its socket. Instead, it looked almost like an eye patch, but with a gold ring that housed the eye. It's very simple, Karkaroff. Someone put Potter's name in that goblet knowing he'd have to compete if it came out. He barked at the man, walking up to him with little fear. Maybe someone's hoping Potter is going to die for it, he added with a pointed look. Karkaroff of course knew what the man was insinuating, as did Naruto and the rest of the older staff in the room. The man's past as a Death Eater wasn't confidential, and clearly many of the English magical community remembered his contributions to the war. Alastair, Dumbledore greeted. Naruto, who had begun to get impatient with what was going on, cleared his throat to catch everyone's attention. Not that I'm not enjoying this detective game you lot are playing, but can we get on with it? I'm feeling rather tired and would like to get some sleep tonight if you didn't mind. Dumbledore shot Harry a look and nodded. I'm sorry, my boy, but it looks like you have no choice but to compete. I understand. Guess it was too much to ask for a regular school year, wasn't it? He asked rhetorically. Very well, we'll begin with the photographs of the champions, Bagman announced, leading them to the side where a single chair had been placed. Ms. Delacour, if you wouldn't mind taking a seat. Mr. Diggory Potter and McGonagall, please stand like this, he ordered, moving them into the perfect positions for the photograph. Naruto stood to her left with his left hand holding a large staff Karkaroff had handed him and his right holding the back of the chair the young woman sat on. Looking down at her, he smiled. If I had known we were going to get our picture taken, I would have worn my good uniform, he commented. His words succeeded in making her crack a smile. Looking away from him, she sat up straight as per the instructions. It only took a moment for the picture to be taken, and with that out of the way, they were free to go. At least that's how it should have gone. The sound of an obnoxious cough caught their attention, and everyone turned to see Rita Skeeter strutting forward. A notepad and quill floated lazily behind her, scribbling away even though nothing had been said. Wait, Naruto thought. She's been here the whole time, meaning she was probably writing down the entire interaction between the adults. He thought to himself. What a charismatic quartet, the woman said, standing in front of them. Hello, I'm Rita Skeeter. I write for the Daily Prophet, but of course you know that, don't you? It's you we don't know, you read the juicy news, she said, shaking hands with all four of them one at a time. What quirks lurk beneath those rosy cheeks? She asked out loud, reaching forward and gently stroking Fleur's cheek. Naruto's hand shot out just as the woman was going to pat her cheek with a bit more force than necessary. Rita's eyes moved from the only female competitor to the blonde man who now had her wrist in a vice grip. What mystery do those muscles mask? She asked, making her way to Naruto. Rita didn't seem at all bothered that someone had put a hand on her. On the contrary, the quill that floated behind her continued to scribble away, documenting everything that happened. Smiling at him, Rita spoke again. What makes a champion tick? Moving away from him, she stood between Harry and Cedric and wrapped her arms around their shoulders and with a wide smile asked, Who's feeling up to sharing? Unsurprisingly, no one spoke. Naruto would rather leave than speak to the woman, but he knew everyone would have to conduct an interview. He locked eyes with the rest of the champions and shook his head. It certainly wouldn't be him. Fortunately for everyone not named Harry Potter, Rita already knew exactly who she wanted to start with. Why don't we start with the youngest? Not giving the fourth year a chance to decline, she grabbed him by the arm and led him away. Naruto snickered once more, causing both Cedric and Fleur to stare at him. What is it? Cedric asked. The blonde pointed to where the two had gone. That's a broom closet, he noted. Cedric looked over and looked visibly sick at the insinuation Naruto had made. Fleur made a face and shook her head in disgust. That was an image I could have gone years without visualizing, she said. It took a few minutes before Harry was brought back to the champion's room looking very displeased. Rita, for her part, looked like she had struck gold. Making her way towards the remaining three, she clapped her hands and looked to Fleur. Your turn, dearie, she said in a sickeningly sweet tone. Naruto could only imagine what kind of lies he would see in the newspaper the next day. The woman had a reputation for twisting words and creating what she called juicy stories that often resulted in misfortune for those unlucky enough to make the headline. Looking toward Harry, who was making his way out, Naruto was certain it would be his name on the headlines tomorrow. After all, there was no way Rita would miss making a spectacle out of a fourth champion. I don't think we've had the chance to be properly introduced, Cedric Diggory, 6th year Hufflepuff, the Hogwarts student said, politely introducing himself while sticking out a hand. Naruto McGonagall, 7th year, he replied politely. A lot of people were surprised to hear that Professor McGonagall had a great-grandson, one that didn't attend Hogwarts no less. Also, I hope this doesn't sound weird, but I'm actually a fan of your dueling skills, he commented. Able to pick up the unasked question in the younger man's first statement, Naruto glanced at his great-grandmother, who was still speaking to Dumbledore, and 2 other professors. Yeah, I moved around with my mom a lot. Grandma tried to get me to enroll in Hogwarts, but I wanted to make sure everything I did was undoubtedly by my own merits. I didn't want anyone to believe that she helped me in any way. She wouldn't, but you know how people are, he replied, to which Cedric could only nod. Also, thank you for the kind words, he added shortly after, responding to the younger student's compliment. You don't know how many people dislike me in the dueling circuit. Cedric nodded in understanding. I can imagine. I remember having watched your match against Villain in the championship round last year. He looked furious after you were able to strip him of his wand. That's usually the way it goes. Though I have to admit, and I don't mean to sound vain, I'm surprised that not many people recognize me here. It's actually kind of nice. The slightly taller man grimaced, and Naruto picked up on it. Something the matter? Well, let's just say that with the revelation that you're related to the head of Gryffindor, as well as your selection as one of the Triwizard champions, people are going to start looking into you. Some who keep up with dueling news knew of you already, those who didn't will in the next few days, Cedric replied. Once finished, an uneasy look crossed his face. He seemed to be trying to figure out how to say what was on his mind. His mouth would open and close repeatedly, as if scrapping the idea and trying again. Whatever he was thinking of was surely something that could come across as either rude or strange. The blonde was no stranger to moments like those. Whatever is on your mind, feel free to say it, Cedric. I'm not one to get crossed easily unless you decide to insult my friends or family, he replied gently. Like Fleur? He asked before his eyes widened in regret. Naruto chuckled at the man's expression but nodded regardless. Like Fleur. So what is it you want to say? You'd better hurry, because chances are you're going into the broom closet with Skeeter next. Swallowing down the disgust he felt, Cedric cleared his throat. Well, it's about that fire spell you used. I'd never heard of it, so I sent a letter asking my family to check our library for anything related to it. Go on, Naruto encouraged, knowing for certain where the conversation was going. I was told it's a very dark charm. One that's just as powerful as fiend fire. So what I'm trying to ask is if it's true that Durmstrang actually teaches the dark arts. He finished, whispering the last part just in case the headmaster was listening in. Naruto scoffed, though not at the student but rather the beliefs that had been ingrained into him. The simple answer is no, they don't teach what you would consider the dark arts. However, unlike other institutions, Durmstrang stresses the importance of magical intent. Of course, there are some spells that are off limits, like the Unforgivables, but we're free to learn any spell we please, he lectured. Some that are more volatile need to be supervised by a professor, but we're warned of the consequences that come from using certain spells. So other than those 3, any spell is fair game for your school? Cedric asked, now interested. He nodded. For the most part, yes. Did my spell bother you, Cedric? He asked curiously. The man looked slightly sheepish and smiled nervously. Maybe a little bit. Mostly after I learned it was a dark spell. Understandable. However, think back to what I told you about Durmstrang. We focus on intent. That spell was modified from its original purpose. That's why Dumbledore didn't have a much worse reaction to seeing it. But he still knew its original purpose, and for that reason he made me stop. Had I used it as it was meant to, I'd probably be expelled on the spot. Cedric was going to reply and ask for more information about it since his family had only said it was dark. He wasn't given the opportunity though since Fleur emerged with Rita on her heels. Like Harry, the quarter Vila looked very displeased. She walked past them with a huff and Madame Maxime followed closely behind, giving the journalist a scathing look as she did so. The Hufflepuff student was the next to be taken away just as the blonde had predicted. Now by himself, he took a seat and waited patiently for the woman to come back out. The trend of unhappy champions continued minutes later as Cedric stepped out with a frown on his face. I take it didn't go over so well? Naruto asked. Wouldn't really know. I hardly got a word in. The Hufflepuff replied with a shake of his head. As the last of the champions, he stood up and followed the woman. Resolving himself to answer with the most vague replies if she got on his nerves, he walked into the small broom closet and down the small steps. Now the final champion. Let's begin, dear, Rita said excitedly. He could only sigh and wait for the first question to be asked. It had been a week since the names had been drawn from the goblet, and so far things were going rather well. After the interviews with Rita, which he managed to make as insufferable as he could, there had been no more news about the tournament with the exception of the date for the first task. November 24th they would be tested on their courage and quick thinking. That was all they had to work with, but he supposed it wouldn't be much of a contest if they were able to prepare ahead of time. Classes had also resumed, though it was a bit of a hassle finding some rooms. Since Hogwarts taught a few of the classes he was enrolled in back at Durmstrang, he had the choice of attending them with the Hogwarts students if he so wished. That was an opportunity he took advantage of, specifically charms. It was the same course under a different name here, but the reason he took it was because he'd been approached by the charms professor personally. According to his grandma, the stunt he pulled on October 30th had gotten the attention of the charms professor. That had been a coincidence since Naruto recognized him as well. The man was a former champion in the dueling circuit as well, and the opportunity to learn from him was something he couldn't ignore. The rest of his classes he took with the professors that had tagged along in unused classrooms within the castle. As a champion, he had certain liberties, but he knew neither Karkaroff nor his grandmother would be okay with him deciding to skip. When a tournament this big and deadly was on the horizon, any bit of knowledge would help you out. Currently, he was sitting in the middle of a joint Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff charms class, listening to the professor lecture them on the use of the impervious charm. It was a bit difficult to keep up for a bit since his textbook wasn't the same one they used, but it wasn't too big of a deal. Even though it was considered a 7th-year charm, he'd already had it down by the end of his 3rd year. Professor, one of the Ravenclaws said as she raised her hand. Yes? He asked. Her eyes darted to Naruto quickly before looking back at the professor who hadn't missed the movement. Will we be learning the blue fire spell that we saw during the feast before the tournament began? I heard it's considered a charm, but no books in the library showed how to do it. Flitwick's eyes looked to Naruto, hoping the young man wouldn't be bothered by the stares the students in his class continuously shot at him. No, I'm afraid not, he said. The spell Mr. McGonagall used is considered a dark charm by the Ministry, he revealed. Most students who hadn't already been informed by the older generation of wizards raised their eyebrows in surprise, and some even looked at him with a bit of caution and distrust. What is it called? A Hufflepuff asked. Flitwick sighed, knowing they wouldn't let it drop until they were satisfied. As was the way of Ravenclaws, he supposed. The spell you all saw is a dark charm known as Predigo Diabolica, he explained in his usual teaching tone. I won't be showing you the wand motions because it could get me in deep trouble with the Ministry, but no, it isn't something you'll be taught in school. Another hand went up. Victor Crumb was able to go through it without being burned by the fire. So why is it considered a dark charm? A great question. Take 5 points for Ravenclaw, he awarded before continuing. The spell Mr. McGonagall used had been heavily modified. It was performed masterfully with a different intention as well as slightly different wand movements in order for it to behave the way it did. That's why it seemed like he was conducting music when the ring was lit. Many of the students began jotting down what was being said. Despite it not being likely to appear on any sort of exam, they were interested in the spell and how it worked. The dark classification on it also had a certain taboo that had people wanting to know more. As to why it's considered dark, that spell was used by Gellert Grindelwald back in the peak of his power. Almost like a signature, if you would. That spell was designed to protect his followers and burn to ash anyone who wasn't with him. The volatility of it is comparable to fiendfire, which is why it isn't taught and has been classified as a dark charm. The class went silent at the explanation. Suddenly, everyone knew exactly why the Ministry would classify it as dark magic. That created a new question on everyone's mind: if it wasn't taught, how would he learn it? Well, as much as I'd love to continue, that's all the time we have for today. Your homework for the night will be a simple page detailing what kind of situation the everyday wizard would have for the impervious charm, he instructed. His eyes found Naruto, and he cleared his throat. Mr. McGonagall, a moment of your time, he requested. Closing his book, he remained in his seat and waited for the aged wizard to speak. Once the last student was out, the door shut by itself with a locking spell keeping the door closed. Is this about the spell? Naruto asked curiously. Flitwick shook his head. Partially, it's the reason I wanted to reach out to you. As a charms professor, I always keep an eye out for talent in the art among my house. I believe in cultivating that talent to help them reach new heights. He began. Seeing someone as young as yourself using a spell like Protego Diabolica with such ease demonstrates the talent you possess. I'm honored you think so highly of me, sir, he replied respectfully. The half-goblin waved off his thanks in a nonchalant manner. It's nothing but the truth, however, despite your talent with charms, it's your talent in the dueling circle that has me interested. If I recall correctly, you're the youngest participant to win back-to-back titles in an adult league, he added with some respect in his tone. The blonde nodded. So I've been told. You've done it yourself quite a few times, he iterated. 5 consecutive championships in the European League and World Dueling Champion twice. I always wanted to see you compete, but sadly you finished before my time. Flitwick smiled in appreciation at the younger duelist's words. He wasn't one to boast about his achievements in the field, even if he did have a full trophy case. It still felt good that the younger generation knew of him, and clearly did their homework. For a time I considered trying my hand at dueling again, but I'm just not what I used to be. I still keep up with the circuit, however, and you are someone I've had my eye on for a while now. Before Naruto could ask him to elaborate, he continued. I spoke with your grandmother about reaching out to you with a proposition, and she accepted. The only thing left was to speak to you in person. A proposition? Flitwick dipped his head. Yes. You're already making a name for yourself among the elite duelists in the world. Some of my colleagues have mentioned you. In a way, I see a lot of myself in you. Your dueling style is a mixture of many different duelists over the years, and I'd like to request a friendly match if you wouldn't oppose it. Naruto had to stop himself from scoffing. Oppose a match with a world-renowned duelist? He would have to be stupid. His wand was in his hand in the blink of an eye, making the professor smile brightly. The man waved his own wand and all of the desks were moved to the side of the classroom. Another twirl and the size of the room expanded considerably. The floors changed into black marble, clear enough that their reflections were easily seen through them. Flitwick made his way towards one end of the room and Naruto to the other. He'd done this plenty of times to know the procedures. The short wizard kept his wand down near his leg and spoke. Allow me to explain the rules, Mr. McGonagall, he began. Naruto is fine, Professor. The seasoned duelist nodded. Very well, I'll extend the same courtesy to you. He was surprised when Naruto shook his head and stared back at him with a serious look. I appreciate the gesture, but I'll refrain from doing so, at least until I win the World Dueling Championship. If I'll refer to you by your first name, it'll be once you can truly see me as an equal in the sport. If the professor hadn't respected the young man already, he certainly did now. Flitwick could see the desire to win and improve in the young man's eyes. Staring deeper, he analyzed the stance and wand placement of the blonde and could find no major flaws. There were a few spots that could use refining, but it was as close to perfect as could be. I see. Well then, allow us to talk a bit more after the match. As per dueling regulations, only magical means are allowed during the bout. No unforgivables nor any of the spells that have been barred by the Dueling Commission, he informed him. Naruto nodded. Flitwick brought his own wand up to his face and stared back at the younger wizard in front of him. The two competitors bowed out of respect. Waiting for a moment, the two stood still, waiting for the other to make the first move. Ultimately, it was Naruto who acted first. His right hand shot out with incredible speed and a light blue spell was expelled from his wand. Expertly, Flitwick deflected the spell to the side and countered with a chain of his own. Naruto could recognize stunners, followed by blasting hexes, and even some low-level jinxes. Though they were relatively harmless spells, the speed at which they came at him caught him by surprise. His wand snapped left and right, tossing aside the spells aimed at him only for 3 more to be following suit. Rather than deflect, he jumped aside and retaliated with a bludgeoning spell. While not exactly illegal, some matches frowned upon the use of bludgeoners, but Flitwick seemed to be unbothered. The short professor shot back at him, once again forcing Naruto to step aside to avoid the spell. Expelliarmus! Both men yelled at the same time. 2 red beams of light collided against each other with a white sphere created in the center. Naruto grit his teeth in slight frustration as he couldn't get the center to move towards his opponent. He said he wasn't what he used to be. Naruto thought to himself in slight disbelief. Adding a bit more power, he was able to gain some traction and swing the tide in his direction only to have to release the spell and step aside a moment later. One of the desks had been tossed in his direction, while he was busy trying to overpower the man. Had he not experienced things like this with transfigured items, it probably would have got him. Waving his left hand through the air, the desk sailed aside harmlessly, crashing into one of the walls. Flitwick was unrelenting and already had his next chain of spells being fired off. Naruto was no stranger to rapid-fire opponents, but Flitwick was on another level. "You've done well up to this point, young man," the professor complimented, batting away a spell and dodging an oncoming one. Naruto didn't respond. Instead, he glanced around the room quickly and flicked his wand at one of the desks behind the man. "Accio. Desk," he whispered to himself. The desk did as he willed it to and flew toward the man from behind. He wasn't finished, however. Flitwick's head turned quickly and his wand pointed at the projectile. Using that small bit of time he bought, he sent a blasting curse towards the remaining desks in the room. They broke into pieces, some sharp and some blunt. Without an incantation, he waved his wand toward his opponent, and the newly created debris began to float in the air before shooting toward him. Another wave of his wand caused them to split into multiple groups, surrounding him from all sides. Smiling in triumph, he finished the attack and shot them at once. Naruto felt his respect for the man increase in response to the man's reaction to the attack. His face remained as cool and composed as could be. Some of his opponents usually panicked, or looked like they were blinded to everything except what was in front of them. Flitwick, however, seemed to be in full control of himself. The man waved his wand in a quick pattern he couldn't discern and watched as a gold translucent shield stopped the attack in place. Most of the debris was destroyed upon contact, but a few chunks remained floating. The shield fell and the weapons he controlled were tossed back in his direction. Thinking quickly, he twirled his wand in a swish and flicking motion, then moved his wand as if drawing a circle in the air. The pieces of wood flew through and changed into droplets of water as they passed. The amount of mist that was formed momentarily blinded him from what was in front, but years of training had prepared him for such an event. "There's only one thing he'll do when he thinks I can't see," he thought. Pointing his wand towards the professor's desk, he silently summoned it towards him. The sound of the desk exploding had proved his hunch right, but he wasn't out of the metaphorical woods just yet. He was soaking, and though he could now see clearly, Flitwick wasn't giving him a chance to regain his senses completely. He was being pushed back. Naruto knew this, but that didn't mean he would yield. From the small skirmish they'd had, he knew there was quite the gap between them. He was facing a world-class opponent, and for the first time, the thought of losing a match entered his mind. Frowning and batting aside a few more link spells, he mentally calculated every potential move he could make. His defense was solid and his spell catalog was greater than his, but that didn't mean he was invincible. All he would need was one instance where he could catch him off guard and he could end it. His thoughts went back to the Quidditch World Cup and the subsequent attack that had happened, and he grinned. He had just the thing. Waiting for a moment to strike, he ducked under a disarming spell and batted aside tripping Hex before making his move. Silently summoning the shirt on the man's body, he mentally cheered when he saw the man's concentration break to look down at himself. That was his chance. Shooting a disarming spell, he watched in shock as the man reacted just as the beam of light was an inch from his face. As he was going to try to rob him of his balance by summoning his shoes, he felt the wind leave his body as 3 desks crashed into him. 1 from behind, and 2 from the sides. A red beam struck, and his wand flew into the hands of the professor, who was making his way over to him with a very excited look on his face. "Naruto, are you all right?" he asked, banishing away the desks, and using a drying spell on the young man. The blonde nodded and stood up. Seeing his wand being offered, he took it and put it away. Sighing in disappointment, he still bowed to the man as was tradition. Flitwick bowed back but kept the happy look on his face. "Do not feel disappointed, Naruto. I have to say you definitely surprised me with your ideas. The talent you have is incredible." "Thank you, Professor, although I'd be lying if I said I wasn't hoping for that last strategy to win me the match," he replied before frowning. "I thought I destroyed all the desks, though." The half-goblin nodded and fell back into his teaching mode when he spoke. "You did. However, the reason you lost the match was because you didn't focus enough on the types of spells being used." At Naruto's confused frown, he continued. "I linked a repairing spell within a disarming spell, because they seemed very similar in color. It would be easy to ignore and think of it as a single spell. Furthermore, something that would be beneficial to you would be to not believe every spell sent would be an offensive one." You batted the spells aside straight towards the desks and didn't realize they had been fixed. From there it was simple to create a distraction by making you believe I played into your hand by purposely attacking the desk you sent. At that point, I had already set up the desks and had to wait for a moment where you believed the match was yours. A look of realization fell on Naruto all at once. When I tried to pull you toward me, he said out loud. Correct. A brilliant move, but you weren't the first to have ever tried that. I can honestly say you're probably the most talented young duelist of your generation. If you like, I would be more than willing to help take you to the next level in dueling. Your potential is limitless, and I'd like to see how far you can go. Naruto had to stop his jaw from dropping at the offer. One of the best duelists in the world was offering to train him just because he wanted to see him get far. I'd be honored, Professor. I humbly accept your offer. The man stuck his right hand out and Naruto took it, giving it a firm shake. Excellent. If it's all right with you, I'll draw up a training regimen, and we'll meet up here every 2 days at about 6 in the afternoon for training. Of course, that will change when the tasks are taking place, but other than that, that will be the schedule, he informed. The blonde nodded and tucked his wand away. That works just fine, thank you again. I guess I'll see you in 2 days. I'll make sure you don't regret the offer. Flitwick smiled at the determination and went about repairing the damage to his classroom while his new student left. Placing the desks back in place and repairing all of the glass that had been shattered, he made his way back to his desk and took a seat. 2 minutes later, the head of the Gryffindor house knocked on the door and stepped inside. Phileas, she greeted. Minerva. I take it you administered your test? She asked rhetorically. You'd be correct. You have quite the grandson, Minerva. I can definitely see how he got to his position so young, he complimented. McGonagall let a proud smile grace her face. As harsh as she sometimes was on him, especially when he'd been growing up, he'd proven himself to be a remarkable young man. It was a pity Hogwarts didn't have him, but she didn't mind much. He was making their family name proud. Hearing praise from a man whose skills in both charms and dueling were respected globally only made the pride for the young man swell further. Did you make the offer? Another nod. I did, and he's accepted. If he's a quick learner, I'm certain he'll be a world champion before he even finishes developing physically. Truly? She asked with a bit of surprise. Absolutely. I'm confident in saying he's actually much more advanced than I was at his age. It wouldn't be a stretch to say he's further than Dolohov was at his age either. That boy will go far, Minerva, I guarantee it. The next day after lunch, Naruto found himself wandering the halls of Hogwarts. He had no classes for the day except runes, but that had been taken care of early in the morning. His grandmother had encouraged him to take a look around the castle and learn his way around. It wouldn't be too difficult, but those moving staircases really tried his patience sometimes. Walking down one of the large halls, he paused when he saw the familiar form of Fleur walking down another hall adjacent from the one he was walking. She turned her head and looked at him. She said something to her friends and walked in his direction. Naruto, she greeted happily, opening her arms. Knowing what she wanted, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. Fleur, what do you have going on? He asked curiously. Nothing much, just exploring, but now that I've found you I have a different idea. His eyebrows raised high at her choice of words, but a smack to his arms broke him out of those thoughts. Rolling her eyes at his predictable train of thought, she shook her head. We haven't been able to talk. What's this I hear about you being an incredible duelist? She asked with an expectant tone. Looking around, he saw the door to a classroom and peeked inside to make sure it was empty. Seeing that it was, he kept the door open for her. Fleur walked in and took a seat at one of the desks, crossing her arms in front of her. It looks like we have a lot of catching up to do, don't we? He asked with a nervous smile. He knew she'd be slightly cross at the fact that he didn't inform her of something as big as his dueling career. Since she had no classes either, he took a seat in the spot next to her and began telling her about his duels and how he made it as far as he did. To his delight, she hung on every word and stared him in the eyes as he spoke, making it clear she was listening. Occasionally she would chime in with a comment or question about his battles and ask for some pointers regarding some spells she'd like to learn. It took about an hour or so for him to finish recounting everything, and the warmth he felt when she smiled at him and told him she was proud of how far he'd come was like nothing he'd ever felt before. You've been busy, she commented. I hope from now on you'll tell me when something important happens in your life, Naruto. I've told you of all major events in my life either in person or in letters, the ones you never wrote back to? Naruto winced at the reminder. He had been foolish to let their conversations die. He knew growing up with her allure that she wasn't well liked. Most girls picked on her and called her all sorts of nasty names, and boys weren't much use since they couldn't behave around her. The guilt showed on his face, but a hand reaching out and touching his arm stopped him from letting it get to him again. I told you you're forgiven. I just hope you don't leave me alone like that again and can share your experiences with me, she said softly. He stayed quiet and looked at her hand, specifically, where she was grabbing. His arm was covered by the brown long sleeve he had to wear, but her hand placement reminded her of what he had beneath the shirt. Looking her in the eye, he made a decision. I won't Fleur, and yeah, I'll share my experiences with you. There's actually one that no one but Victor really knows about. If it wasn't because you're so special to me, I probably wouldn't even think about showing them to you, he said sincerely as he stood up. Fleur felt heat rise to her cheeks at his choice of words, but she forced it down. He seemed to have something important to say. She could contemplate what he meant later with the girls. The heat was hard to push down since, to her confusion and secret delight, he stood up in front of her and pulled the long sleeve off of his body. Another long sleeve, though this one was of thin material, was pulled off until she saw what he was referring to. Shock coursed through her, and her eyes stayed glued onto one spot in the upper part of his chest. She of course noticed the bandages on her arms, but before she could ask about them, he began to undo them. The bandages fell in a circular pattern onto the floor, leaving his upper body completely bare. Oh my, she whispered, both in intrigue and slight horror at the implications. What did you do to yourself? Naruto stepped closer to her and kept his back to the door so that the light from the window could illuminate him for her. Her hand came up and touched his inner arms as well as his chest. Naruto shuddered from the contact but made no sounds. He wanted her to see that he was serious about what he said and would answer whatever questions she had. Still in her sitting position in front of him, Fleur looked up with wide eyes and opened her mouth to speak. Sadly for them, the front door was opened at that moment, revealing a trio of her classmates. Hands flew to their mouths at the sight. Looking over his shoulder, Naruto realized how it must have looked from their position. Fleur had her hands up on his body, mouth open, and was positioned quite low. It's not, he started. Sorry for interrupting, they yelled and slammed the door. Naruto looked down at the mortified form of Fleur, whose face was redder than the Gryffindor colors. She covered her face with her hands and sighed, knowing she would have a hard time explaining the scene. Maybe we should do this elsewhere another time, he said. Fleur nodded and helped pick up his bandages. We will. I have a lot of questions, she said. I thought you might. I'll try to answer them as best I can. But just to be clear, we're all right? He asked. Fleur looked at his body once more and sighed but nodded, handing him one of his shirts. Yes, but I think you're one of the most careless men I've ever met. Be glad my mother wasn't here to see this. I imagine she would have select words for you. Naruto chuckled nervously, knowing how Apolline would react. She had always treated him like part of her family, and if she knew he'd done something as stupid as this, well, he was certain he would get a French mouthful. Putting the rest of his uniform back on, he followed her out the door. He was very thankful that it had only been her classmates. Had it been a professor or his grandma, he was sure they would have focused on him. The following morning, when he stepped through the doors of the Great Hall for breakfast, all eyes turned toward him. Some eyes darted to Fleur, who was staring down at a newspaper in her hands with an angry look. Taking his seat next to Victor, the man placed a newspaper in front of him. Read this, he ordered. Looking down at the paper, his blood began to boil when he read the headline. Durmstrang's champion ensnared by Bosbaten's villa? By Rita Skeeter. He hadn't even read it yet, and he already knew the article would be full of lies. Someone's going to die for this, Victor. Naruto took a moment to catch his breath and control the anger that was quickly rising within him. His hands clenched around the paper with enough force that he was rather surprised that it hadn't shredded. Closing his eyes, he took 3 deep breaths to rein himself in. This was something he learned from Crumb, who often did it out on the Quidditch pitch when the team wasn't performing up to their best. Naruto thought the technique to be ridiculous, but oddly enough, it actually worked to a degree. His eyes glanced at the paper and then the empty spot next to him. Crumb had excused himself to go to the restroom a few minutes ago, leaving him to stew in anger alone. Are you all right? Asked a female classmate to his right. She looked slightly worried, having never seen him this frazzled before. Everyone at Durmstrang was used to seeing him with his stoic expression that gave off the impression that he had everything around him under control. Just fine. No one believed him. Turning his attention back to the paper, he shook his head and proceeded to see what Rita Skeeter had written. Durmstrang's champion ensnared by Bosbaten's villa? By Rita Skeeter. As we all know, the infamous Triwizard Tournament has been reinstated by the Department of Magical Games and Sports. Not only has this prestigious tournament caused controversy among the wizarding community due to its fatality rate, but this year is already full of drama. Firstly, the tournament features a fourth champion, our very own Boy Who Lived, more about that on page 3. Secondly, and arguably most importantly, Bozbaton's champion has seemingly taken it upon herself to secure a competitive advantage. Reliable sources claimed that Fleur Delacour and Naruto McGonagall were seen inside an abandoned classroom with the latter's top having already been discarded. The Daily Prophet cannot confirm or deny that anything had happened at the moment, but their positioning left little other theories to be brought up. It is well documented that Veelas are passionate beings capable of bewitching and ensnaring their prey, and who better to target than Durmstrang's finest? Veelas are. Naruto's face betrayed no emotion as the paper went up in flames in front of him. The moving images soon stopped and blackened before being erased completely. The Durmstrang delegation looked on in mild concern as their champion was seemingly on the verge of losing it. "Say something to calm him down, Elena," one of the other boys, Ivan, said with a small shove to the girl closest to Naruto. The woman looked over at her classmate with a frown and replied in a hushed whisper. "What do you want me to do? Do you think he'll listen to me right now? He'll probably attack me if I even say something to him." Fortunately, with the article now out of his face, it seemed that the blonde would finally be able to calm down some. The contents of the paper was still around him, but as long as he kept his eyes closed and continued his steady breathing, they would be able to placate him. Durmstrang's good fortune was short-lived, however, as one of the Slytherin students had just finished reading the article and turned to his classmates with a scowl on his face. "Despicable," he spat. Naruto's eyes snapped open and turned to look at the speaker. He wasn't someone the blonde recognized, though from the way he carried himself, he was likely a pureblood. "I always knew Veela couldn't be trusted. Sure, they look good, but that's all they got going for them. Why the department allowed them to compete knowing the advantage they have is beyond me." The Durmstrang students looked on at the Slytherin student in disbelief. Surely he'd seen how well Naruto got along with Fleur, and he was blatantly letting his bigoted views out in the open. Looking back to their champion, everyone's breath hitched as they watched the sequence of events unfold as if in slow motion. Quicker than anyone could react, Naruto reached into his pocket and pulled his wand out. His blue eyes burned with anger at the blatant disrespect he was showing one of his dearest friends. A light purple beam of light exited the wand, traveling toward the still unsuspecting student. The spell was a modified version of the tongue-tying curse. The base curse was a simple way to withhold someone from speaking, be it incantations for spells or just speech in general. Naruto had tweaked the curse to force the intended target to attempt to swallow their own tongue. The appendage would twist backwards in a painful way as it attempted to push itself down the person's throat. Expectedly, the student's hand came up to his throat in a futile attempt to stop what was happening. The purple beam of light was still piercing his mouth, doing its best to complete its task. Everyone could see the Slytherin reaching for his wand in an attempt to stop the torture, but in his panic, the wand slipped out of his hand. "Shit, someone go get Crumb," Elena ordered. Fortunately, the Bulgarian seeker had already re-entered the Great Hall and was sprinting over. "Naruto! Let him go!" Crumb yelled, pulling out his own wand, but quickly stopped himself from firing a spell. In his friend's current state, there was a chance it would only make things worse, and the last thing they needed was a small war breaking out within the halls of another school. The blonde showed no indication that he'd even heard his friend's command. Just as the student's face was beginning to match the color of the spell, Naruto found his wand arm twisted behind his back and his head pressed against the wooden table. The spell was disrupted and released. Crumb's forearm was pressed up against his friend's neck, keeping him locked in place. "Control yourself," Crumb grunted quietly. "Think about what this is gonna look like for our school. Attacking some idiot for whatever reason is going to reflect bad on us and yourself. If word of this gets back to other duelists, do you think they'll take you seriously?" Naruto's breathing stabilized and the hold on his wand slackened, letting it fall onto the table with a soft clink. "I'm calm, Crumb," Naruto replied in the most even tone he could muster. "Get off of me, you're heavier than you think you are." "Are you going to do something stupid once I let you go?" his friend questioned. If he could shake his head, Naruto would have, so instead he settled for a simple no. His wand was swiped up by Crumb, who then lifted him up by the back of the shirt. The rest of the Durmstrang students stood and followed the pair out, knowing they would most likely be heading to the ship for a talk. Crumb had missed the lead up to the event, so one of them would need to catch him up to speed. Elena was the last to stand and stopped once she was directly in front of the offending student. Had we not had a tournament to win, Crumb's reaction would have been a lot different. "You got off easy," She spoke with a slight accent before following her classmates. The members of Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and Gryffindor all balked at her words. That was being let off easy. Slytherin, however, picked up on her wording and knew what she meant. Naruto would have killed him if the tournament wasn't taking place, and Crumb would have likely let his friend kill him. Draco stared at his fellow pureblood with a look of contempt, and shook his head. Speaking without thinking is a Gryffindor trait. He spat. Your unfiltered spiel pissed off Durmstrang's champion, who also happens to be Victor Crumb's best friend. I know you're set to have a seat in the AizenTheGoat once you become head of the family, but perhaps you're better off keeping your mouth shut. Draco wasn't all that fond of Vilas either, but he knew better than to say something. The entirety of the school could see there was something between the two champions. Now one of his own housemates had all but put Slytherin's good standing with the sons of Durmstrang in jeopardy. With Draco voicing his disapproval, soon, the rest of the Slytherins began to join in, each making sure to let their fellow student know he had made a grave mistake. Blaise Zabini was especially ruthless in his critique, which was saying something considering the man was usually quiet and reserved. Those in the Ravenclaw table all noted how not a single person checked to make sure the boy was okay. What in the world is happening? Minerva questioned in an alarmed tone. One moment the students were having breakfast and the next, a spell was fired and her grandson was forcibly restrained by one of his friends before he could kill a student. Of course, she was aware of the stupidity that Rita Skeeter had written about the villa from Bose Baton. Minerva was not one to believe the gossip that women liked to spread, but she didn't think Naruto would have reacted so negatively. It seems Snape drawled out that your grandson did not inherit your calm demeanor. The elderly witch glared at the potions professor but didn't rise to the bait. Igor, Dumbledore called out. The Durmstrang headmaster looked up from his plate with food still in his mouth, looking slightly miffed that his meal was being interrupted. What is it? We need to know what you plan to do about your student who just attacked another, headmaster, Flitwick added with some distress. Glancing over at the students, he noted most of the houses were now talking amongst themselves about the same thing. He had no doubt that soon word would reach the families. To my understanding, it seemed to be a provoked attack. Karkaroff replied in defense of his student, though he was very much upset that his hot-headedness had interrupted his meal time. Dumbledore sighed inaudibly but nodded. That seems to be the case. Young Naruto didn't strike me as the type to fight unprovoked, especially as he's a trained duelist. Be that as it may, we cannot allow something like this to go unpunished. The families of the students must be assured that the halls of the school are safe and no one is allowed to do as they please without repercussion. Karkaroff rolled his eyes. Something like this was common in Durmstrang. Some students didn't know when to shut their mouths, and it got them in trouble more often than not, but that was how they learned. Then what do you propose, Albus? He asked. Minerva coughed into her hand, getting everyone's attention, and spoke. If it's no problem with you, I would ask that you leave his punishment to Hogwarts. One of ours was assaulted. I believe it's only fair we set the disciplinary action. You mean you? Karkaroff shot back with a smirk. Ignoring the narrowing of her eyes, the headmaster shrugged. I suppose I could allow you this request. The Hogwarts staff leaned forward subconsciously, knowing there was a but coming soon. They were not disappointed. But only on the condition that I'm made aware of what the first task of the tournament will be, he offered with a grin. Being the hosting school, the tasks need to be approved not only by the sporting governing body, but by the headmaster or mistress of the institution. This will be for my own peace of mind, I assure you. I'd like to make sure one of my star students will not be in anything too life-threatening. Flitwick and Minerva glared at the man, not believing a single word he uttered. Everyone at the table knew he would be relaying the information to his champion the moment he received it to give him an advantage. Snape crossed his arms and closed his eyes. Karkaroff was many things. A coward, a sellout, and a fraud, but he wasn't stupid. He saw the opportunity to turn a negative into a positive for his school and took it. He could respect that much. He peered over at his house's table through slightly narrowed eyes and could only shake his head in disgust. They were Slytherins, the best Hogwarts had to offer, and one of his own demonstrated just how big of a dunderhead he was. Most of the other students that came from prominent families seemed to understand that as well, if the scathing looks they were sending the offender was any indication. Staring at the student for a moment longer, Snape thought back to the spell that was used. Unlike the others, his eyes had been watching over the students when the spell was fired. What should have been a rather harmless spell had quickly been changed to cause damage. Snape would be the first to admit he had his own preconceived notions about the blonde considering who he was related to, but the boy had shattered that image. He had fired that spell with minimal wand movement and held it without breaking a sweat. Such magic bordered on dark depending on who you asked. He looked over at his colleagues who were still discussing with Igor, and he focused his attention on Flitwick. It was no surprise that the man found Naruto interesting. They had something in common. And if the man's words were to be believed, the blonde would pass the likes of him and Dolohov quite soon. After that display of magic, however, even Snape would admit his attention was piqued. Maybe the others weren't full of it after all. Perhaps we should hurry before it seems that we're incompetent, Snape said out loud. Already the students are looking over toward us wondering what will be done. What's more important, knowledge of the first task or disciplining a student? Dumbledore sighed in defeat. You're right, Severus. Igor, I will ask that you keep this information strictly for your own peace of mind, he replied, knowing in his heart that the man would not stick to his word. Of course. I'll leave that conversation to you then, Albus. I will deal with my grandson, Minerva said angrily, stalking down the great hall. The students speculated just how bad the blonde's punishment would be. They knew the elderly woman was a strict but fair professor, but after something like that, no one could guess what would come of it. Ignoring the cold breeze hitting her skin, Minerva strode toward the ship, her eyes peeled hoping to see the blonde outside. No such luck, however. Her arrival must have been noticed by someone, as once she was close, Victor Crumb exited the vessel and made his way over until he stood directly in front of her. Mr. Crumb, Minerva greeted in a short but polite tone. Professor McGonagall, the Bulgarian replied in an equally polite tone. While he was usually polite to most elderly people, knowing that this woman was the great-grandmother of his best friend, he made sure to show the utmost respect. I'm hoping to speak to my grandson. Everything has already been cleared with your headmaster. She spoke. Crumb said nothing. Instead, he turned his head to the deck of the ship where one of his classmates waited. With a nod, the young man disappeared below the deck. While I'm here, I'd also like to thank you for your intervention, Minerva continued. I won't say I'm thrilled about the way it was handled, but nonetheless you likely prevented things from escalating further. Victor laughed and nodded. Firing a spell could have made things worse, he explained in his strained English. There was only one way to stop him for good. He's unharmed, he reassured the woman. Minerva nodded. Ah, here he is now. The blonde came out looking much more composed than he did in the great hall. His clothing was straight, and there were no markings on his face from the impact on the table. If anyone were to look at him, none would have guessed the events from moments ago had ever transpired. I'll see you guys on the ship in a minute, Naruto muttered to his friend. Victor patted his shoulder twice and muttered something in Bulgarian before returning to the ship. Your headmaster has agreed to allow Hogwarts the right to decide your punishment, the woman said with restrained anger. You will be serving detention with me tonight, and that's when we'll go over the details. I'm sure you can find your way there. 8 p.m., do not be late, or the consequences will worsen. Naruto could only nod at her words. All things considered, everything was going smoother than he imagined, though he figured it might not be that way during detention. Should I bring anything? Minerva shook her head. Just be present, and know that your mother will definitely be hearing about this. You can write to her yourself, or I will do so tomorrow. There it was. Naruto grimaced. He knew his mother wouldn't take the news well, no matter the reason. If there was one thing that had been drilled into him, not only by her, it was to control his emotions. For the most part, he'd done that well. It was that control that allowed him to perform as well as he did both in and out of the dueling circuit. Now with a clear mind, he could only grit his teeth in anger at himself for his slip-up. I'll let her know. Good. Do not be late. The rest of the day passed by agonizingly slowly. Unsurprisingly, Naruto decided to skip classes for the day as he was sure his presence at Hogwarts would be a distraction. When night fell across the land, Naruto sighed from his bed in the ship and slipped into his jacket once more. His classmates looked at him with mildly pitying looks and wished him luck. Naruto could feel his worry welling within him the closer he got to the castle. The few times he'd been admonished by his grandmother, the punishments were always usually some form of writing exercises that left his hands cramping. This time, however, he couldn't guess what she would have in store for him. At least I didn't attack someone from her house, he muttered to himself. He knew of the rivalry between the two houses and how much his grandma loved her house. If it had been a Gryffindor, he was sure she'd kill him. Pushing the front doors open, he looked around the hall and spotted someone, a Hufflepuff, walking by. Excuse me? He spoke politely. I have a detention with Professor McGonagall tonight. Can you tell me where I can find the room? He was pointed to the correct moving stair set, and was given detailed instructions on how to reach her classroom. The paintings on the wall all watched him slowly trek down the halls of the school, sometimes whispering to him, asking him questions. It seemed even the portraits were interested in Minerva's family. When he finally reached the room, he noted the door was open and he could hear some voices chatting inside. There must have been about 5 or 6 people present if he were to take a guess. With a final sigh, he stepped through the doorway and stared at the group of Gryffindors. One of them was familiar. A redhead who stared at Crumb when they arrived as if he were a god. The Gryffindors held their stare, although Naruto could see a hint of both awe and fear in their eyes. The fear was understandable, but the awe escaped him. Mentally shrugging, he took his seat near the front next to the red-headed guy who was quick to stand up and make his way to the back. Naruto smirked at the response to his presence and crossed his arms. No one made a sound, but Naruto was very much aware of the gazes on his back. After 10 minutes of silence, his head began to dip down as a wave of drowsiness overcame him. The room was warm, quiet, and the chair he sat on was surprisingly comfortable. Just as he was going to rest his head on his arms and nap for a few minutes, his grandmother stepped through the room. Her face was just as stern as it was when he last saw her. "Do you not think about the things you do, boy?" she asked heatedly before delivering a rather hard thump to the back of his head. It wasn't painful as it was back when he was a child, but it was still uncomfortable. "Is your self-control so poor that a few bigoted words were enough to assault another person?" Naruto remained silent, taking the beratement on the chin. The Transfiguration Master opened her mouth to continue but stopped when she realized there were others in the room. Her lions stared at her with their mouths agape, having never seen her discipline anyone with physicality. Straightening up, she cleared her throat and spoke. "Your detentions have been revoked. Please leave the room and close the door," she ordered. "Mr. Weasley," she added, looking at the red-headed student. "If I'm forced to assign you another detention for the same reason, your punishment will be severe. Do you understand me?" The young man nodded and quickly made his way out of the room. Having seen how Naruto's detention had started, he could only wonder what she would do to him. He and his friends had surely stressed her out over the years. His punishment could be the same or worse. Now alone once more, Minerva rounded back on her grandson. "Not only did you assault a student, you don't realize just how much worse you've made the situation, have you?" she asked. "You've basically confirmed the lies Rita wrote about you and Miss Delacour by acting in such a manner. How do you think that will affect her? She's treated differently by the English magical community enough, and with this adding on top of everything?" Naruto grimaced and rubbed his face. There had been a chance of turning things around, but word of what happened had surely gotten out. Rita claimed he'd been ensnared, and attacking someone wasn't the best way of proving someone wrong. He would need to find Fleur and apologize for potentially making things worse. "I'll find a way to fix this. Even if I have to go to Skeeter herself," Naruto replied. Minerva shook her head. "Rita may be slimy, but she has a way of twisting the truth into something worth reporting. If you confront her directly, how can you be sure she won't take your words as a threat? If she does that, your reputation will get worse. No, we need to think things through very carefully before getting anywhere near that woman." As much as he'd like to simply barge into her workplace, he could concede it wouldn't be a good idea. He would need something to use against her. Some sort of dirt that he could hang over her to twist her arm into doing whatever he wanted. Where would he find that, though? "I'll get in touch with some people. She wasn't there when I was talking to Fleur, so someone had to tell her. I'll have eyes on her as well and wait until I have something concrete before trying anything against her." "Good. Now, on to the matter of your punishment," she continued. "I've been thinking about it the whole day and came to a decision. Because the student in question was not one of my lions, and to keep both the staff and students from thinking you get special treatment, I decided your punishment will be administered by the head of Slytherin," she announced. Thinking back to the morning, Naruto tried to recall who was present at the staff table. Of course he remembered Dumbledore, and his grandmother along with Flitwick and Karkaroff. There were a few more, but sitting closest to them was another, but their face escaped him. He tapped his fingers against the desk irritably. He could only remember black clothing but no face to match. "In any case," Minerva continued, snapping her fingers in front of him. Her wand was soon in her hand, and with a gentle wave across the board, the sentence "I will not disrespect Hogwarts" and its students again was displayed in white writing. "You will be writing lines for the hour that you're here." Before he could tell her that he didn't have anything to write with or on, a quill and piece of parchment suddenly appeared in front of him. Sighing in defeat, the blonde took the quill and began. By the time the hour was coming to an end, his wrist was sore and his palm sweaty. She had only allowed him a momentary break but was soon forced back to writing. It was a punishment after all. "I need another sheet," he called out. Minerva raised her wand only to stop when a soft knock on the door caught their attention. Naruto raised an eyebrow, wondering if there was another unfortunate soul that would have to do this. The door opened and a man in a black cloak with shoulder-length black hair entered the room. His demeanor was stone cold, and his stride silent but with purpose. McGonagall. His voice was low in tone, just above a whisper, but could still be heard through the entire room. Professor Snape. His grandmother answered in a curt tone. I was meaning to speak with you tomorrow, but this will save me time. Before that, however, did you need something? She questioned. Naruto almost snapped his fingers when he realized this was the person he had forgotten. This was the head of the Slytherins. Perhaps he was here to personally tell him what his punishment was. A chill went up Naruto's spine now that he looked at the man. He had a no-nonsense air about him, not in the same way as Karkaroff, but similar. I wanted to formally meet our newest celebrity, the man replied, looking over at the blonde with an appraising look. That and to discuss some things. I see. This works out well then, I suppose. If you're not opposed to it, I've decided on allowing you to decide his punishment, as one of yours was directly involved. You may discuss in this classroom as his detention has run its course. I do ask that his punishment be announced in public once you've decided. The smallest of smiles appeared on the man's face. Of course. It will be done in the Great Hall tomorrow. Minerva looked between the two until her gaze landed back on her colleague and she felt her stomach churn. Snape was staring at her grandson with the same curiosity that Flitwick had displayed. She trusted Flitwick, and his background in dueling matched up with the older wizard's own, which was why she allowed him to reach out. Snape, however, was not someone she would claim to trust. Perhaps Albus did to a frightening degree, but the rest of the staff had their reservations about him. Minerva could only hope that she had not made a mistake in allowing the two men to speak. Not showing any emotion that could give away her mental unrest, Minerva made her way out of the classroom, shooting the two men one final look before closing the door behind her. Looking back at Snape, Naruto found that the man was simply staring at him with an unreadable expression on his face. There was no indication that he was upset, no wrinkles on his forehead showing his displeasure at Naruto's actions. Nothing. The silence was deafening. Only the soft cracking of the flame from the candles lit around the room could be heard if one tried hard enough. Tell me, Snape finally began. How did it feel to cast the spell? Naruto blinked in confusion. How did it feel? The spell you used was powered by negative emotion. You had to want to cause some sort of injury, otherwise it wouldn't have worked. Snape explained. Thinking back to that moment, Naruto tried to recall the exact feeling. Rage was the first to come to mind, but that wasn't what the man was asking. Digging deeper into his psyche, he focused on the feeling of the spell itself. The wave of pleasure that washed over him when he saw the bastard trying to swallow his own tongue. The pure glee that had overcome him as the young Slytherin struggled in vain to free himself. Naruto wanted to scowl. He was better than that. He could cast dark spells and feel absolutely nothing, but this had been different. He'd lost control. I see you don't like the answer you've come to. You liked the feeling and momentarily lost yourself in the dark. Snape recited as if reading his mind. A dangerous situation, more so for a duelist. Your mind must be sharp and unclouded by emotion. He continued in the same soft tone he'd used the entire time. You sound as though you're speaking from experience. Naruto replied. That was the first time I've ever lost my cool. It won't happen again, I assure you. Snape looked unconvinced. And if they speak ill of your friend again? Naruto's hand clenched quickly but soon relaxed once more. It was quick but not quick enough to go unnoticed by the older man. I see. That girl is special to you, but it is through her that your control wavers. With all due respect, I have to ask, is there a point to this conversation? Naruto asked in the most polite tone he could muster. Snape nodded and mentally smirked. Unlike Potter, he could see much promise from the young man in front of him. Like my colleague, I too have found myself curious about your abilities. Flitwick was interested in your dueling skills, but I find myself wondering about your talent in the dark arts. Snape revealed. His eyes bore into Naruto's, trying to find any trace of panic or nervousness. There was none. Naruto's mental defenses went up seconds after feeling the lightest probes within his mind. Not happening, the blonde commented. Snape took no offense to the remark and inclined his head slightly. Good. You have experience with occlumency and even detected my probe. Most would have never felt the slight disturbance. The blonde huffed. Most don't care to learn, do they? Anyway, I don't buy into the whole light or dark thing. Magic is magic, it does what we will it to do. If we want something to happen, our magic will answer. Accidental magic from a young age is proof of that. The older wizard agreed with the statement. Magic was all about intent, not whether a spell itself was innately light or dark. He didn't miss that the young man hadn't answered his question, however, and let him know as much. I've learned my fair share of questionable curses. Naruto replied cryptically. I see. And are the bandages you hide under your clothes part of what you've learned? Naruto couldn't hide his surprise at the man's words but managed to not look down at his arms. How did he know? His jacket covered his arms, there was no way he should know anything. He stopped for a moment and thought back to the slight poke within his mind. Had Snape actually managed to get information out of him before being pushed out? I caught a glimpse during the altercation in the Great Hall. Snape clarified. You move without issue, so I know there's no injury, which begs the question, why is your arm bandaged? I can only assume self-mutilation, which I doubt, or some form of Muggle tattoos that you don't want seen. His mind was clear thanks to his experience with the clemency, but Naruto was far from calm. Now he was in a pickle. Snape was part of the staff of Hogwarts. If he saw what he had done, word would soon get back to his grandmother as well as Dumbledore. There would be no legal trouble, but the questioning he would be subjected to would be intense. Scholars and experts alike would flock to him wanting to question how he did it, and why. He rubbed 2 fingers against his temple as the thought of the headaches that would surely follow assaulted his mind. Unfortunately, Professor, I can't disclose that information. Snape hummed softly. I see. Allow me to give you a piece of advice then, McGonagall. The dark arts are many, varied, ever-changing and eternal. Fighting them is like fighting a many-headed monster, which, each time a neck is severed, sprouts a head even fiercer and cleverer than before. You are fighting that which is unfixed, mutating, indestructible. That first outburst in the hall will be one of many if not dealt with. So what do you propose? More clemency training? Naruto asked curiously. He wouldn't admit it to the man, but his short speech had captivated him. The man had been correct in his assessment. Every time he used a dark spell, he could feel a pull of sorts to continue using them. Today, in the Great Hall, the pull had been so intense to continue that he had almost gotten tunnel vision. The wizard shook his head. No, what you need is to learn how to cast those spells properly. To cast them with the correct state of mind so they don't consume you, and in turn, you will have ultimate control. To demonstrate his point, Snape waved his wand in front of him with incredible speed and summoned a small sphere of fire. The embers seemed to roar, wanting nothing more than to break out of the circular prison they were contained in and destroy anything in its path. You recognize the spell? Snape stated, his face showing only slight discomfort at holding the spell. Fiend Fire. Naruto replied automatically. I can cast it too, but I've never held it together like that. I can only direct it and call it off. It's difficult. Snape once again nodded and with another flick, dispersed the flames. It is. But not impossible, with the right instruction. And your offering? Naruto asked skeptically. I am. Like Flitwick, I'm also reminded of myself when I see you. You're an ambitious individual who understands magic is about intent. I can help you tighten your hold on your magic and teach you how to properly cast certain spells. To do that, however, I need an answer. Naruto didn't question what he wanted to know, he already knew. The bandages. Snape was clearly capable of casting powerful spells with more ease than him, the show of Fiend Fire proved it. He chewed his bottom lip as he thought back to the events of the morning. Insulting Fleur had sent him over the edge. If it happened again, would he be able to keep himself calm if Victor and the others weren't around? Not a word of this will leave this room, Naruto demanded. While he would have liked to keep it to himself, the opportunity to learn under another master probably wouldn't come again. With Flitwick helping him in dueling, and Snape helping him with the more powerful magic, he would grow by leaps and bounds. Of course, the man agreed. Having nothing left to say, Naruto stood up and removed his coat but quickly cast a few spells to make sure the room was free of any unwanted visitors. If he woke up tomorrow and Rita had covered what was on him, nothing would save her from him. Azkaban be damned, she would be murdered. Once he was sure things were clear, he removed his shirt and undid the bandages of both arms. Keeping his eyes directly on the Slytherin head, he let the bandages fall. Even the Stoic Potions master could not hide the shock when he saw what was hidden. His eyes were wide and his jaw had unlatched about an inch. Snape's eyes looked at both arms, identifying each and every mark he saw. Taking a few steps closer, he inaudibly began to mutter the names of each mark he recognized. From the shoulders down to the elbow and inside of his forearms, intricate markings connecting and disconnecting ran across like a network of sorts. His face scrunched together in confusion and slight concern when he noticed a distinct pattern on his left forearm. Glancing at the right one, he narrowed his eyes as the same pattern was present, only seemingly mirrored. Put your arms together, Snape ordered. Naruto did as he was told and wondered what the reaction from the man would be. Snape wasn't old enough to have been around when this was present, but having been around Dumbledore, perhaps he would recognize it. The issue was whether or not it would be a problem. How peculiar. Do you know the significance of this mark? Snape asked. I do. This is a dangerous game you're playing. This mark has a negative connotation behind it. Snape continued. I'm aware. We aren't talking about that, though. I did as you asked? Naruto replied, trying to steer the conversation away from the marks. Snape sighed but nodded nonetheless. You have. I will come up with a timetable for lessons. For now, let's decide what you'll be doing for the next month. Now it was Naruto's turn to sigh. He had completely forgotten that this had been about his punishment. Don't worry, it won't be as bad as you think. Though you'll soon find out what it's like to work with dunderheads. Before we commence breakfast, Dumbledore announced from the head of the staff table. Professor Snape has an announcement to make. Professor. The dark-haired man stood up and stared at the students with no amount of love behind his eyes. Casting a spell to expand the reach of his voice, he cleared his throat. Thank you, the man said with no real gratefulness in his tone. I will be quick. For the next month, Hogwarts will be having an optional elective. Most of the students muttered to themselves, wondering what kind of class would be taught. Some, the Gryffindors, already wanted no part of it if Snape would be leading the course. They all knew his bias toward his house and the general animosity he showed the Lions and to a degree the Puffs. The course will be about spell modifications and how to essentially transfigure live spells as they're shot. The course will be led by Mr. McGonagall. He stepped aside and allowed Naruto, who had been disillusioned behind him, to show himself. The blonde stared boredly at his classmates, who shrugged as if saying it could be worse. Moving his attention slightly to the side, his eye caught Fleur, who quickly turned away from him. He wanted to go talk to her, but the look her classmates sent him told him that wouldn't be an option. He needed to apologize, but when would he get the chance? Those wishing to sign up must see me on Monday afternoon. That is all. Naruto was allowed to return to his place within the Slytherin table just as the food appeared for them. Turning around, he saw 4 girls walking away with Fleur, each with multiple plates floating behind them. Damn, he muttered. I'm sure she'll calm down soon. She can't be mad at you forever. Naruto's head snapped up. To his surprise, it hadn't been one of his friends who'd said that, but rather Draco Malfoy. The older blonde wasn't sure what brought this on, but he inclined his head. Yeah, I suppose you're right. Not knowing what else to say, he filled his plate and began to slowly eat. Snape had said he would deal with dunderheads. If that were true, this would be one of the last few peaceful meals he'd get. Well, aren't you being productive? Naruto's head lazily raised from its place on the pillow and glanced at Elena, who was standing at his door. She was already dressed in their uniform, hat and all, while he was still in his sleepwear. It was only 6 in the morning after all. Rubbing his eyes tiredly, he groaned in the small delight that came from removing the built-up crust that had formed overnight. He could have used magic to get rid of it. It would have done a much better job than him too, but the feeling he got from rubbing the edge of his eyes created a sort of relief that magic just couldn't replicate. Is there something you need this early in the morning? Naruto asked in a polite tone. If you hadn't noticed, I'm not decent right now. The woman scoffed. Please, since when have you ever cared about decency? You've changed in front of me before. If anything, I should ask you if you have any decency for doing so without saying something first. Naruto let a smirk spread across his face as he remembered the wide-eyed look his friend had given him after he'd stained his shirt, and he simply took it off. Minus the bandages, his abs had been only a foot or so away from her face, which had turned a light shade of pink. Whatever. What did you need? He asked again. Victor asked me to come wake you up. I don't know why he couldn't come himself. Hurry up and get dressed and meet in the cafeteria so we can get the first serving of breakfast. You know the bread tastes different after an hour, even if you use magic to heat it. Having said what she needed to, she closed the wooden door to his room, leaving him alone to his thoughts. While he would have liked to get another hour of sleep before having to prepare himself for another day of Hogwarts, he knew he wasn't getting any more shut-eye now. His knees cracked as he stood up and made his way to the small bathroom his room had available and took a quick cold shower. Nothing woke the body up like freezing water assaulting you first thing in the morning. Once done, he grabbed the standard brown uniform his school provided and made sure he was free of any creases, since Karkaroff would likely get on his ass about it. Unlike the others, however, he and Victor had been given 2 jackets that differentiated them from the rest of the student body. Both were trench coats in their styling, but one was puffy with fur lining the insides as well as the hood, the other was a form-fitting coat that was held together at the waist with the buttons lining the side of his chest. He tightened the belt and glanced at himself in the mirror with a frown. He loved his school and his classmates, he really did, but the way he was forced to dress. He's making Victor and I look like we belong in Poland in the 40s instead of school, he grumbled to himself. Leaving his room, he headed 2 floors down to the small cafeteria. Everyone had the option to dine at Hogwarts as they had been invited, but sometimes the attention became a little too much. Victor due to his status and him because some students now thought that if they caught him at a bad time, they would be the next ones he'd force to swallow their tongue. Over here. Victor's accented voice called out to him. There's only 3 of you here right now, Victor. Naruto replied lazily as he made his way over. I could have found you by myself, believe it or not. The man smiled, completely unbothered by his best friend's sarcastic reply. A habit, I'm afraid. Anyway, I figured breakfast on the ship before the others woke up would be nice. We haven't had a chance to hang out in the last week. That was true. With the class he'd been forced to teach along with the courses they needed to attend and mandatory training, socializing had been put on hold. Hell, the last time he and Victor had actually spoken was when the man had stopped him from killing that Slytherin. Taking his seat, food instantly materialized on the plate that had been set up for him. Taking a moment to blow into the bowl to cool down the contents, he looked up at his friends. How's things been going for you guys? Enjoying Hogwarts? More than you, that's for sure, Elena quipped. Victor chuckled at the change in Naruto's demeanor but nodded in agreement. It has been decent. Some of the classes I'm in are enjoyable. The professors here seem to be happier than the ones at Durmstrang, though they're a bit too relaxed in their approach to discipline. How does it feel teaching a class? Naruto's shoulders sagged and he took a moment to take a bite of his food before answering. Dreadful, was the simple reply. I can see why Professor Snape has a permanent scowl on his face when he deals with students. In his own words, most of them are dunderheads and I can't find it in myself to disagree. Elena took a sip of her water and shook her head. That bad? That bad, he confirmed. Almost no one pays attention to what I'm trying to explain. I suppose they thought they would be firing spells all class period instead of learning theory first. They don't know how much work actually goes into changing the composition of a spell as it's fired. Elena let out an unladylike snort and rolled her eyes, unbothered by the pointed look her blonde friend was shooting at her. To be fair, when you explained it to me I struggled to stay awake. Battle magic like that is more exciting to see rather than learn about. Only those who might have an actual use for it would bother, she pointed out. Victor shared her sentiment. He himself had a basic understanding of how the technique was performed, but it had little application on the Quidditch field. The only time he could have used it was at the Quidditch World Cup, but even then he had simply used overwhelming force. On the bright side, a couple of Ravenclaws seemed to pay attention. Them along with a blonde-haired Slytherin girl and a bushy-haired girl from Gryffindor. Besides them, the rest are just wasting my time. Naruto noted that the Bulgarian seeker almost worked up at that bit of news. That was interesting. Well, it is a punishment, Elena pointed out. She glanced around to make sure no one was looking and cast a quick Wingardium Leviosa on a piece of meat on her plate and flung it at the blonde who had repeated her words in a mocking tone. Asshole, she muttered, much to both men's amusement. No, you're right. I guess it isn't supposed to be fun, Naruto conceded. But I had at least hoped that more than 4 people would take an interest in it. Who doesn't want to get the upper hand on their opponent? Victor took a large bite of the steak on his plate and took a heavy swig of a drink Naruto was sure wasn't water or tea. In their defense, they don't operate like we do. Hogwarts is more lax. They don't have an official dueling club, nor do they practice any form or dark arts. They're never in a situation where they would need to turn their wand against someone, the Bulgarian explained. Naruto had to admit, he had a point. Hogwarts was more unified than Durmstrang, even if they did shoot themselves in the foot with the house system. Why divide your students into different factions and then do nothing to stop the growing animosity between them? Just from the few people he'd spoken to in Slytherin, he knew their disdain for any and all things Gryffindor ran deep. A feeling that was very much mutual from the Lions. Except at the Quidditch World Cup, Elena added afterward. You two were just as off guard as everyone else when the attack happened, but you quickly went on the offensive. That just seemed to prove the men's point, as both nodded once and shared a fist bump at the memory. Between the two of them, they had likely reached high double digits in terms of how many they'd taken down. The Durmstrang students who knew of what transpired had expressed mild concern over how easily their 2 prized classmates had dispatched people as though their lives were meaningless. Potter was there, Victor recalled. But I don't think he battled unless I'm mistaken. We left shortly after. He wouldn't have lasted. Even though they tout him as the guy who beat Voldemort, I'm not sold, Elena said with a scoff. He was a baby. How would a baby not only survive the killing curse but also manage to kill the strongest Dark Lord in recent history? Naruto shared the sentiment. He believed there was something more to Potter. There were rumors about him in the castle. Most negative at the moment due to people thinking he snuck his way into the tournament, but there were others. Some involved a basilisk, others with a teacher, and some unbelievable. Regardless, there was more to the young man and Naruto would keep an eye on him. He was confident if it came down to it, he could put Potter in the dirt, but he couldn't write him off just yet. Naruto! Elena half yelled, snapping her fingers in front of his face. With a small scowl, Naruto batted her hand away. What? The young woman muttered something in her native tongue that he wasn't quick enough to translate. The only thing he knew was that he had been insulted somehow. Victor laughed at what their classmate had said but didn't bother letting his best friend know what he'd been called. I asked if you have to teach that class again today? She huffed. Yeah, Naruto replied in a sour mood. He really hoped by now those who didn't really care would just drop out. If enough people left, his punishment would end by default. You couldn't have a class without students after all. I think I'll drop by today, Victor announced, causing Naruto to raise an eyebrow at the declaration. The man already had an idea of how it was done, and if he really wanted to master it, Naruto could just teach him personally. He was missing something here. Victor knew powerful spells and was proficient in multiple styles of combat. His wand work was precise and his spells were hard for the average wizard to stop with a basic shield. Just as he opened his mouth to question his decision, he paused. Victor had seemed delighted to hear of his misery while teaching, but his demeanor had changed when he mentioned the few students that paid attention. Particularly when he had told them about the Gryffindor girl. A Cheshire grin began to form on his face as he put the pieces of the puzzle together in his mind. Victor didn't give a damn about spell transfiguration. Victor was more interested in the Gryffindor girl. Her name is Hermione, in case you didn't already know, Naruto commented. Elena blinked and then looked over at Victor, who was looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. So you can think of something other than Quidditch, she snarked happily. To their surprise, rather than go on the offensive and tease them about something like they had expected, the man took a deep breath and nodded. He took another 3 gulps of his drink and wiped his mouth with a napkin that he summoned from the end of the table. His eyes darted to the side and saw 3 other students finally making their way to get breakfast. Their faces still showed signs of sleepiness, but they knew if the headmaster arrived before them, they would never hear the end of it. I did know. I'm just unsure of how to approach, Victor admitted. Naruto smiled and took a bite of his food. Don't worry about that. Just show up today and I'll take care of everything for you. I'll create a chance for you to talk to her, all you have to do is make sure not to blow it. No pressure, Elena said happily, receiving 2 stares in return. She shrugged. Naruto shook his head. This woman didn't miss her chance to take a dig at someone, did she? At least one of us will be in good standing with a girl, Naruto commented. Fleur is still avoiding me. If it makes you feel any better, I don't think she's mad at you. After all, you did attack because that asshole was bad-mouthing her. Elena tried to reassure him. If anything, she probably doesn't want to make your situation even worse. Naruto frowned. What do you mean by that? He asked, bringing his hands together in front of his face. The young woman muttered something once again, but before she could explain, Victor took over. Fleur has enough problems here as it is since she's a Vila. Now people believe she can cast some sort of magic on you to gain an advantage in the tournament. Seeing the 2 of you together right now would only further the rumor, especially with how close you 2 are. Everyone knows you're already in trouble. Even if you don't give a damn about it, she likely wants to keep you from digging yourself into a deeper hole. Elena finished. That made a lot of sense. They were right to say he didn't care about his punishment, it was an annoyance at most. The angry letter he'd received from his mother, on the other hand, had definitely left him feeling small, but at least she was proud of him for sticking up for a friend. Even if that would cost him when he saw his mother again. Just give it a few days until that reporter has something new to talk about. Everyone will forget about you 2 soon enough. That was true, but Naruto didn't quite fancy having to wait until the next big story broke. Unless Potter somehow found himself in another big scandal other than joining the tournament, he doubted this would go away so quickly. He briefly wondered if this news had reached back to Fleur's family. Her dad was well connected in the political scene in France, and there was no way he would sit idly and let some slimy reporter say whatever they wanted about his daughters. You're probably right. I'll still try to talk to her, but I doubt it'll work. Their conversation was brought to an abrupt halt as the rest of the Durmstrang students entered the area along with their headmaster, who looked just as unfriendly as he usually did. He smiled at his prize students, making them subtly shiver in disgust. The man had seemingly decided that toothpaste wasn't good enough to use. His yellow teeth only seemed to increase the off-putting demeanor he already had. "Good morning." The student body repeated the phrase loudly as per their instructions. "It's good everyone is here. I have important news to share," he said before turning his attention to his two most valuable. Before that, however, he trailed off. "Need I remind you the importance of not intermixing with the other schools? They are competitors, no more, no less." Naruto rolled his eyes and Victor shook his head. The rest of the students shot worrying looks at the two. It was no secret that even before the Triwizard tournament, they had been on thin ice with the headmaster due to multiple instances of disrespect. "It should be assumed that everyone is trying to get information out of you. Naruto," he barked. "As a known duelist, your style is already known by some while you know nothing about the competition. Do not allow them to see your true abilities until it's too late. Am I understood?" The blonde in question nodded, but everyone, including Karkaroff, could see he was simply nodding to get the lecture over with. The older man grit his teeth in frustration, but a deep, calming breath kept him under control. "So what's the important news, headmaster?" one of the older boys asked from another table. As much as he and the others would have liked seeing the headmaster continue to be tested by his 2 stars, the ship probably couldn't handle a fight like that if it broke out. His smile returned in full force, and not even the blank faces of Naruto and Victor could wipe it off. "In exchange for allowing Hogwarts to punish you," he began, shooting the blonde another look, "I was able to find out what the first task would entail. For my own peace of mind, of course." No one believed him. "Knowing the bloody reputation the tournament has made for itself, I see it only fit to make sure you don't go in blind." Naruto almost whistled. Usually Karkaroff's announcements were a waste of time. Complaints against students or staff was what they had grown used to. But this? For once the man had proven himself to be somewhat competent. He supposed he would need to be if he had been kissing the Lord of the Dark Lord all those years ago. "Dragons," he announced. "You'll be selecting a dragon at random and will be forced to retrieve a fake egg that will contain a hint as to what the second task will be." "Dragons?" Naruto muttered to himself in shock. That wasn't at all what he'd had in mind. One-on-ones, a race or two, maybe even having to set a time against someone else, sure, but this? He could see why so many people had died in the past. He glanced down at his arms with a pensive look on his face. There was something he could do, but it would require him to get very close. Enough to lay a hand on the beast, which was easier said than done. Stealing something from such a dangerous animal was already risky, but getting close without being crushed, burned, or swiped was another matter entirely. Victor spared him a glance, almost as if he could read the blonde's mind, and looked away, though not before making a sign with his hand that Naruto knew meant they would chat later. "I'm sure you will have no trouble accomplishing the task," Karkaroff said with a tone of finality. He expected perfection from their champion. Anything lower than it would result in another pointless lecture. Naruto nodded. "I already have a plan. It would probably be a good idea to assume that the other champions know as well. And if they don't already, they will by the time the first task comes around. Delacour likely already knows. Her headmistress is a crafty and resourceful woman. Diggory could go either way, and Potter," the man said, scoffing at the youngest champion's name. "From what I've seen, no one will help that boy. He's no threat." Naruto let out a silent scoff at the man's words. No threat? It was foolish to dismiss someone outright even if you knew you could beat him. Regardless, he outwardly showed agreement with the older man's words, if only to get him to be quiet. Eventually, once he was content that the students had gotten the message, Karkaroff had left the ship, having to attend a meeting with the other headmasters of the participating schools. The remaining time was used by the students to continue to unwind before the day would start. Naruto wasn't so much dreading the day as much as he was dreading having to teach that damn class again. At least this time, though, Victor would be present, and he had an idea to help him out. The day had gone exactly like the blonde had imagined. His mandatory classes were mundane and mostly uneventful. Most of the Gryffindors continued to avoid him like the plague that wiped 45% of the European population all those years ago. The Slytherin students treated him well, particularly Draco Malfoy, who commended him on the way he handled the situation. That had thrown him off slightly, as it was his understanding that the Malfoys were rather big on blood purity and all that other nonsense, but he didn't question it. By the time the end of the day came and the students began planning what to do with the rest of their time, Naruto made his way to his temporary classroom to prepare for the lesson. As had been the case since the classes started, Professor Snape was already present. The man stood tall behind the desk, his cold, almost lifeless eyes staring at him as he walked through the doorway. "Mr. McGonagall," he began smoothly. "I'm glad to see you're on time." "When haven't I been?" Naruto replied just as quickly. "I'm sure you want this to end just as much as I do." "Indeed," Snape replied. "Had your grandmother not insisted on a punishment fitting the crime, we wouldn't be stuck here. However, we cannot change the past now. I trust you have an idea as to what you'll be teaching today." The blonde nodded. "Good. I will observe and afterward give you my thoughts on the lesson. I believe starting next week we can also begin your lessons," he continued, referring to his use of the dark arts. Naruto liked to believe he had a solid grasp on that particular branch of magic. However, seeing Snape conjure fiendfire and keep it contained in his palm without losing control showed him just how much he still had to learn. That spell was dangerous to cast, and even more dangerous to contain. To see it bent to someone's will like that was an eye-opening experience. "I'll look forward to it." Before they could continue, the first of many students walked through the door. His disappointment in seeing a particularly uninterested Gryffindor vanished a moment after once the Ravenclaws began flooding in. They nodded at him politely and took their seats, quills in hand ready for what they could learn. A few minutes later Hermione arrived, and shortly after that, Victor did as well. Those who were interested in Quidditch perked up seeing the man despite him being present in their school for days now. They continuously shot the man glances as if trying to work up the courage to do or say something to him. Naruto tapped his fingers impatiently against the wooden desk next to him for another minute. When no one else entered the room, he waved his hand, willing the door to close, and a silent spell locked the room. "Good afternoon," Naruto began. The class muttered his greeting back as per usual. "Today, I think we'll do something a bit different. We've covered the basic theory of spell transfiguration, but knowledge isn't understanding. The best way to learn is by doing and getting a feel for the magic itself," he began in a professional tone. Even the usually uninterested students perked up at his words. Knowing that there would be a practical application of everything they'd gone over had managed to wake them up. Naruto wasn't sure if it was because most of them just wanted an excuse to shoot each other, in the Gryffindor's case, or because they really wanted to test themselves. To do so, I'll be breaking you guys up into pairs. Your goal will be to simply change one spell to another just as we've discussed. You will be transfiguring Stupefy into a Confringo simply because they are relatively low-level spells. One of you will have a shield up while the other attempts the spells. When I give the signal, you will change," he instructed. A student in the front row raised her hand. "Yes?" "The room is too small for practice like that, isn't it?" Naruto looked around. She had a point. With another wave of his hand, the room began to expand until it was at least 3 times larger than it really was. "Any other questions?" he asked. Every Ravenclaw student raised their hand. "Any other questions about the lesson?" he corrected himself. As expected, the hands went down. "Good. You too," he said, pointing at 2 random students on opposite sides of the room. "You'll be a pair." He continued on randomly assigning partners until he got to Victor. As was his job as the man's best friend, he set him up for success. He pointed to him, and then Hermione, who seemed surprised that she would be partnered with a superstar Quidditch player. There were only about 8 more students after that to pair up with, and soon, the class had divided itself into neat rows to begin. The blonde slowly walked around the room for the next few minutes, idly checking the progress of the students. As he had expected, many of them had frowns on their face as they shot stunner after stunner with very little success. The Ravenclaws were frowning though for a different reason. They had knowledge of the technique, but their understanding was sorely lacking. Their spells shot out without so much as changing color, but they were determined. Naruto smiled at that. It was nice to see some perseverance. Crumb had been able to pull it off a handful of times, which had made Hermione assault him with questions. The easily upset Bulgarian, however, showed no signs of annoyance, and tried to explain everything he could before she started and even during her attempts. The 2 locked eyes briefly, and Naruto shot the man a discreet thumbs up before moving to the next group. All in all, the rest of the class period had been a success. 2 students had been able to perform at a level that was acceptable, though not enough to say they knew how to do it. He had confidence, though, that if they continued attending and practicing on their own, they would have no problems within a month. "Good work, everyone. I know some of you don't hear this often, but I'm proud of you. Be sure to come by tomorrow for more practice." Some of the students frowned at his words, unsure whether to be upset by the insult or thankful for the backhanded compliment. In the end, most just picked up their belongings and made their way out. He nodded at everyone who made eye contact with him and gave some pointers to those who asked, including a certain bushy-haired girl. You don't seem to need much help, Miss Granger. It seems Victor did a pretty good job instructing you. You managed to successfully perform the task at hand after only a handful of attempts. Naruto complimented. I suppose you're right. She admitted, still somewhat dejected, that he didn't have any more tips to help accelerate her learning. I'll admit I was a bit worried to get Crumb as my partner, but he's proved to be very intelligent. Naruto nodded. He's smarter than people give him credit for. He's more than just a Quidditch star. He's a talented duelist, near the top in academia at Durmstrang, and despite his appearance, he's actually one of the most caring guys around. Hermione stared at her temporary professor with a confused frown. Didn't he slam your head into the Slytherin table and then twist your arm behind your back? Friendship comes in many forms, Naruto hastily replied. When she said it like that, it sounded bad, but that had been the correct course of action. Anyway, as much as I'd love to keep chatting, we can't stay too long. I don't want to take up any more of Professor Snape's time, he said, nodding to the head of Slytherin, who was staring at the Gryffindor with a look of indifference. Right. I'll see you tomorrow. She tightened her hold on her books and finally left the two men alone. Snape patted himself down and returned the room to its original size before pacing in front of the blonde slowly. From a teaching standpoint, that was almost passable. Almost? You must speak with purpose, stand tall, and exude an air about you that lets everyone know you are in charge. I suppose there's only so much you can do without the ability to give and take house points, Snape said, muttering that last part to himself. Naruto frowned, having caught a bit about the points. He could only assume that house points were awarded by the staff and were likely tallied at the end for some kind of prize. It seemed a bit strange to allow teachers to award or reduce points when they could easily be accused of favoritism. It didn't matter who it was, everyone was biased for or against something, and that could be exploited. So what do you suggest? Naruto questioned. If you were teaching permanently, I could give you a more detailed list, but seeing as this will only go on for a little longer, he began. Don't try to hide your disappointment in them. Even I can see some of the dunderheads didn't care until they were told they could fire spells. If one isn't paying attention, make them pay for it. Negative reinforcement is the best way to get a point across. It seemed his annoyance hadn't been hidden as well as he thought. He managed to put on a facade that he believed was possible, but if one had caught it, chances are the others had as well. Not that he really cared, mind you. I'll take that into consideration. Like you said, this is only temporary. I have to start preparing for the first task. Ah yes, the first task. Everyone is eager to see how you perform given your accomplishments. Naruto smiled. I'm sure I'll live up to whatever expectations have been put on me. There's nothing the tournament can throw at me that I'm not ready for. Snape's lips threatened to curl up at the blonde's declaration. It was as he expected. Karkaroff had told him, but he was sure Maxime had also told Delacour. That remains to be seen, he said as he made his way to the door. I'll send for you next week for your first lesson. Be sure to be rested, you will experience training like never before, he warned before exiting. Naruto took a look at his bandage-covered arms and made a fist. Whatever Snape had in mind, he would conquer it. He couldn't stop a smile from forming on his face as he reflected on his trip so far. A world-class duelist had taken him under his wing, and already he'd seen a vast improvement in his technique, speed, reflexes, and creativity. Now he would be learning from someone adept in the dark arts to hone and improve on what he already knew. All he needed to do now was clear the air with Fleur, deal with Rita, and win the tournament. But so far he could say confidently that life was good, and if he had his way it would remain so until the end of the tournament. What if Naruto goes to Durmstrang Harry Potter? End here, and thanks for watching my video till the end.